Ross, can you hear me?
Hold on, she said give her a second.
Yes, I can hear you.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Question before we begin. Are you amending R44 with this new amendment that's on our desk? It's Amendment 2, Alderman Arnett. Are you introducing this today?
I don't have Amendment 2 on my iPad, so I do want to do an amendment to indicate that this is a one-time only funding.
Yep, this is Cynthia. That is the amendment that he's talking about.
Okay,
But
I don't have
he-
it in front of me. It's not
So can
part
you
of-
send it to him, please?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, I sent it to him. He has it, but I'll send it again so it's top of the list.
Well, so it's not in Granicus. Let me go to email.
Granicus until we adjourn this meeting.
Kaylin will put it in Granicus as soon as we begin the meeting.
Okay, great.
Okay? All right, Alderman, are
Good
you
afternoon, Brooks.
ready?
Hey, how are you?
Good.
Okay, I'm going to call the Rules and City Government Committee meeting to order. Note for the record, Alderman Schandelmeyer is here and Alderman Arnett has joined us virtually. I welcome an approval of the agenda.
Madam Chair, if I may, I have 3 amendments to the agenda. I would like to add AP 53, AP 54, and then I would also like to move 01324 to the top of the legislation portion of the agenda.
Could I get a second?
I'll second that, but I don't have those 2 APs, so I'm not sure what they're related to.
Then I will second them. I have them in front of me. Is there a way we can get Alderman Arnett a copy of these? After,
After we adjourn the meeting, that's when I can upload them in Granicus. The agenda was already sent out when I received these things, so after the meeting and after they're voted on, then I can upload whatever is approved.
so he will not be able to see any of this information.
Send the picture. I can send the picture, but
Well, I think we need to adhere to our rules. If the information isn't available when we begin the meeting, then it can't be on the agenda. But we've made the motion, I've seconded it. So we're adding AP 53, AP 54, and moving our
01324.
01324 to the head of the legislative portion of the agenda.
Yes, Madam Chair.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, approval of the minutes from the September 6th meeting.
Move approval of the minutes?
I was not here, Madam Chair. I had a work appointment, so I cannot second.
I will second that. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay, and we have one appointment, AP 1024, the appointment of Mr. Patrick Hogan to the Ethics Commission. Mr. Hogan, are you present? No, he's not.
do you all want to meet the appointment?
Yeah, this is not a reappointment. This is an initial appointment, so we will have to postpone action on this appointment. All right, that takes us on to the legislation, and we are going to take 01324, planning and zoning, expanding daycare. Alderman Schandelmeyer, I'm sorry?
Didn't get a second for the AP.
We need a second to postpone it?
I will second the postponement, Madam Chair.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, so now we're on to 013. Alderman Schandelmeyer, this is your legislation, so do you want to fill us in on some specifics?
Yes, Madam Chair. This is a really simple bill. The goal of the legislation is to allow daycares to be opened, constructed in each of our commercial districts as a permitted use and as an accessory use, as a permitted or an accessory use in each of our commercial districts. Currently, they are prohibited in the B1, the B2, the B3 commercial district, the BR, the C2, the C2A, and then they are also only allowed as a special exception in our mixed-use districts as well: the professional, the MX, the PM, and the C2P. I discovered this when a friend of mine had a daughter about a year and a half ago, named me Godfather, and they were talking about the high cost of childcare, and they were saying this is as much as our mortgage. I was curious, what are some of the causes? And in Annapolis, I discovered this is one of the potential reasons behind it, and along with the shortage. We are still requiring our standards and the state standards in this legislation. This is purely just a focusing on allowing it by the zoning standards as well. And my hope is that this will address our shortage and potentially bring costs down.
Questions, Alderman Arnett?
The strongest comment I think I can make is to ask to be added as a sponsor. But I particularly applaud putting it in the mixed uses. That's where we're intending to expand the mix of both business and housing. And it seems quite appropriate to have daycare near that, either near the business or near the housing.
I very much agree. And in some of the mixed use standards, I think that's where we potentially can see these opening the quickest. And along with as accessory uses in some of the religious institutions as well. So I think that's where we're going to see the shortest term gain on this, maybe in some of the other areas. I do want to state for the record, I am not aware of this impacting any specific projects. If you guys are wonderful, I hope it helps, but I am really excited and proud of this legislation. So Alderman, I'm very happy to hear you joining me as a co-sponsor in this.
And actually, if we ever can get the Eastport Shopping Center approved and underway, Seeds for Success is located in that shopping center, but not in the new development area. But to the extent that it's a commercial area or a residential area, that may be a great opportunity to add a daycare center.
Oh, that'd be wonderful. Here, I'm actually going to pull up what that would actually, that's currently zoned as a...
B2.
Yeah, it's currently zoned as a B2, so it's technically prohibited right now. So
Yep.
That would be a really great opening for this. This is a simple bill. I hope this will really open up some opportunities, and I'm really proud of it. So thank you for joining as a co-sponsor.
And I think you should be proud of it. And I think after affordable housing itself, and maybe even larger than affordable housing, daycare shortage is one of the impediments to real wages and ability to afford housing.
I agree.
So I would offer a motion that the Rules Committee recommend favorably on this ordinance.
I shall second.
Okay, further discussion. I do have a couple of questions.
Oh, yes, Madam Chair.
A number of years ago, we had daycares in several churches and community centers, and the state came around and closed all of those centers. So, and we all know that there is a dire need, as you've said, Alderman, for daycare. So are we, have you looked into the state's restrictions, or are you just saying that whatever the state guidelines and procedures are, that's what will be followed in the city? Well, we have to.
It is the latter. We have to follow the state standards. I do know that the state is looking at adjusting what its standards are. There was a meeting led by Comptroller Learman. I believe Senator Elfrith was part of it. Senator Don Guile from District 33. I believe Executive Pittman was part of it as well. and they were talking about this does appear to be a priority for the upcoming legislative session because it's become a statewide need. I understand land use very well, so that's what I wanted to focus on for this. I'm hoping that when those new standards are adapted and adjusted that we can take advantage of this, but this is something small I thought we can tackle now, some small step forward, and that can do some good now, and that's where I wanted to go forward with it. We do have some additional standards at the city level that if we want to take a look at next, I'm very happy and willing to. Like a lot of regulations, they may have been put in with really good intentions, but they can kind of layer on top of each other and block what we really want to see. But with this, I wanted to keep it very simple. I wanted to keep it very straightforward because I thought this was a good small step that if we kept it that way, could pretty quickly and easily pass.
Thank you. And I too would like to be a sponsor.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
I guess my next question has to do with the Capitol's involvement. I see that attached to the legislation is the Capitol advertisement and then a Gazette affidavit.
My understanding is because this is a zoning change or a change in the zoning text, we had to advertise in the Capitol and then provide an affidavit that we put forward that advertisement. Is
Okay,
that correct, Ms. Rutter?
Yeah, we do that, but generally we don't attach those things to the legislation, which is fine. It's not a problem, but obviously it's something that we're doing differently. So, but this is what would normally have to be done when there's a zoning change.
That's correct. We're attaching it because it shows that we follow the law.
Okay. Well, good. I have no further questions. Hearing none, all in favor of giving O 1324 a favorable recommendation, please say aye.
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 Thank you, everyone.
Okay. All right, going on to O 0624, citywide prohibition on new drive-through windows. Alderman Schandelmeyer, you're one of the sponsors on this legislation.
Yes, Madam Chair.
Would you like to speak to it?
Yes, Madam Chair. This is more controversial and a little more complicated, which is why I did want to put it down a little bit further from my nice, simple bill. There are a couple factors behind the driving of this legislation. As we passed our recent comprehensive plan, we do want to move towards a more walkable city. And that does mean moving away from car-dependent infrastructure. And drive-throughs are the most egregious example of it. So what this bill does is it prohibits the construction of new drive-throughs. It does not touch existing facilities. In economic matters, we put forward an amendment to try and clarify that. I don't know if we have it on our agenda today. I don't see it on our agenda today. Oh, it is.
Amendment 1.
Yes, it is. Excellent. So that will be heard, which I think clarifies that a little bit more along with some additional things. But the goal of this is to stop new construction. It is simply not even stop the bleeding legislation. It is a stop the cutting legislation. Drive-throughs have massive blow-up walkability in neighborhoods. They create environmental impacts with increased exhaust. They create environmental impacts with increased stormwater due to impervious surfaces. And then with our recent land value study, we see that these often lead to financial losses for the city. The majority of our drive-throughs are revenue negative when we see how much we spend on infrastructure for water, sewer, roadway, sidewalks, police, and fire services compared to the tax revenue that we get, and they're revenue negative, which means we are subsidizing them. Now, most of these drive-throughs are operated by larger corporations, and I think that we can spend I think we can spend that money in a lot more efficient ways here locally. So that's why we need to start moving away from this type of development pattern, and the goal of this ordinance is to do so.
I am looking at your amendment. Would you speak to it?
Yes, Madam Chair.
It says on behalf of the Economic Matters Committee.
Yes, Madam Chair. So Economic Matters heard this legislation, I'm blanking on the date. I believe it was September 16th. And the goal of this, there was a couple bits of confusion on one, we wanted to clarify language for if there was an existing structure that had a drive-through and a new building was coming and a new business was coming into it. Our friends in the Bankers Association actually brought this forward as a concern when I had a meeting with them as far as like renovations. I know there is a fast food restaurant that had closed down and there is a new one coming into that. We in Economic Matters did not see that as constructing a new drive-through ourselves. And so we decided that if the building is remaining the same, not undergoing any massive major modifications was the legal language used in our code, we decided that they can keep that as a use for the building itself, even if ownership or the business changes, unless it is within 1,000 feet of the school. Why we kept that as a number is there is one business or there is one building with the drive-through within 1,000 feet of Annapolis Middle. I think that creates substantial risk for children walking to Annapolis Middle along Forest Drive. I know this won't be the thing that makes Forest Drive 100% safe, but it's just one less thing to worry about for them. And then we also wanted to do, unless the property is rezoned, because as we move in towards these mixed-use walkable developments, we wanted to phase these out, and we thought that was a good way to begin the gradual phase-in. So Economic Matters itself has not given a formal recommendation on this amendment. We were just kind of coming up with it on the floor. We will hear it at our next meeting. But it did pass through with myself, Alderman Savage. Alderman Gay was verbally on board, did not give a formal sign-off by email, so we don't have his name on board, but verbally I believe he will eventually get onto it, but I'm giving that wiggle room caveat for him.
I am looking at the attachments to the legislation, and I have particular interest in the equity report. And in it, some of my concerns are addressed. So could you speak to how this legislation would impact the underserved, the underrepresented? You know, we're talking about seniors, we're talking about people with small children, those with disabilities. You know, there's several demographics, I think, that have been defined in this report that would be negatively impacted.
Well, there's a couple different things on this. One, existing facilities are not being touched, so they are still in existence. Two, in regards to disabilities and seniors, my grandmother's 88 years old. She can't drive anymore. She walks around, though, with some assistance through either a walker or 2 ski poles. Every little bit of car infrastructure that makes that walk more dangerous, less safe for her, is something that's keeping her more housebound. These drive-thrus are an example of that type of infrastructure. Same thing with families with small children. One of the #1 killers of children is cars. These types of infrastructure, drive-thrus and the facilities and infrastructure that supports and gets built around them, create that bigger sense of the car is the most important thing. Drivers get lackadaisical about everybody outside of it because as you get these high speeds built more around cars, you kind of get into this headspace that people outside of the car aren't really there. Driving is what's called a stage 2 activity. It's when you don't exactly pay full attention, unlike a stage 1 where you are in the zone, 100% fully focused on everything around you. It's stage 2. You're listening to the radio, you're bopping along, and that's what most of us do while driving, and pedestrians very frequently get ignored, and that's how a lot of these collisions happen. And in regards to minority communities, the high reason why these get a lot of, I believe that the reason that these are used more frequently in minority communities is because that's where we've put these. It's if you were to try to put these in like a more affluent white neighborhood, it gets organized against and fought. And so it's just kind of been a holdover of that old Robert Moses era where the undesirable things are shoved in the minority neighborhoods. And that's a negative aspect of city planning. I feel like if we were to see more Whole Foods shoved into minority neighborhoods, well, we'd see more minorities in Whole Foods. But instead it's fast food drive-thrus. So I don't know if that's that's a bad point, Brooks, or
You're stretching it further and further, but okay.
maybe not Whole Foods, but with those prices, but
I can't even afford Whole Foods.
maybe not Whole Foods with those prices, but I feel like my general vibe is on point. Fruit stands or something along those lines. We use the things that are close to us, and when you shove a bunch of fast food restaurants next to minority neighborhoods, that's what tends to get used more and more of. I understand the concerns around equity, but I think a lot of that just happens to be holdover from that Robert Moses planning area of put the things that we want to use, but also just pass through and don't want in our neighborhoods over there by those people, which has always been used as a segregationist tactic.
Alderman, I'm not sure how to take your comments, to be honest with you. In today's world, and you've highlighted for us in the past how people want a walkable community where all of their amenities are close. That is restaurants and banks and drugstores, and everybody has a drive-through today to make it convenient and profitable for the organizations. I would love to see the data that supports drive-throughs that generate more accidents than others, or in the areas. I think SOFO, and I'm surprised they're not here today, which is our organization that represents all of Forest Drive, would argue that their businesses on Forest Drive are convenience and significant because there's such a vast variety of places where you can go and get the service without coming downtown or going to West Annapolis or going to Parole. So businesses along that major corridor, which I contend is one of our business corridors in the city, has a problem with this kind of restriction. We all understand the dangers of driving and people not paying attention, no matter whether it's a drive-through or not. It's just an issue that I don't know who's going to address it, but it's an issue. So there are, it's just not racially motivated, the equity questions. And equity deals with, different categories, as I've said, people with disabilities, or seniors in general, or, teenagers, and hours of day. Do you want your teenager to get out and run into the drugstore at 9 o'clock at night? Or can they just whip through the drive-through and pick up whatever medication they may need? So there's a litany of things, and I really don't think the research speaks to prohibition on drive-throughs because it impacts the life expectancy or, the danger factor. So anyway, that's my major concern about the legislation. While it sounds good and may, speak to, I'm not even going to say a safety issue, because I don't think it boils down to that. We really want to get people out of their cars, and if you limit where they can use their cars, then they may leave their cars. But in the meantime, we're impacting those who need their vehicles and who need this service to take care of whatever it is they need.
Well,
So,
Madam Chair, in regards to SOFO's taken zero stance on this legislation.
well, they haven't officially, but they've spoken to me about it at an event just a couple of weeks ago. And I was supposed to, shame on me, I was supposed to let them know when this hearing took place. And I did not reach out to them. So I will make sure that they are aware if this is on the agenda for the next meeting, so that they can come to speak to it at that time.
And also looking over their membership, there's literally 2 businesses on their membership list on their website that even have a drive-through. It's Shore United and Arundel Savings Bank. For the most part, it's sit-down restaurants and services.
I think you should redo, because I'm sure there are far more drive-throughs on Forest Drive than those 2.
There are,
So-
but I'm strictly speaking members of SOFO.
Well, they represent the whole community, even if they're not members. They're still representing, there's over 1,000 businesses on Forest Drive. And all of them are within the boundaries of SOFO. Actually, they've extended their boundary because originally they stopped at Chinquapin. And now I believe they go all the way at least to Route 2, if not Riva Road. So anyway, Alderman Arnett, did you have a question or a comment?
I have both comments and questions. I'll start with the comment, and I'm torn on this because I view this in reality because the city is largely a built environment, a symbolic piece of legislation, and I subscribe to that symbolism. If we're ever going to change dependence on automobiles, we have to start at the margin, and we have to start changing the mindset in when we do zoning legislation and permitting of projects. Having said that, I don't think there really are going to be very many more banks built. In fact, I think they're closing branches. But I do see the desirability of drive-through windows for pharmaceutical purposes, and even for banks to the extent that they already exist for people with disability or illness that need to do banking and can do it at the window. So there's the ideological portion of this and then the practical portion of this. But I do have some specific questions, starting with the Economic Matters amendment, which I kind of like, but this is maybe a question to go to Cynthia because I don't have my zoning code here. Cynthia, what is the difference between permitted, subject to standards, and then subject to standards? I think subject to standards means it has to be reviewed by the Board of Appeals or the Building Board of Appeals. Am I correct?
That is my understanding.
But permitted means, so like in here, in the amendment, they would be permitted in the B1 district, following only the standards that are set forth for B1 districts.
I'm going to turn that, I am not strong on the zoning code. Maybe Vicky can help us out on that one.
Vicki Buckland, Assistant City Manager. I will need to follow up on that question and get back to you.
Okay. Because when in talking with Alderman Gay about this, he had the notion that we ought to make all of these new drive-through windows subject to standards, which would mean they would need to go one by one before the Board of Appeals and explain why it's needed. But something that is not mentioned in this legislation and is something that has occurred to me is I do understand the liabilities that drive-through windows present for both pedestrians and bicyclists, scooters, and so forth. And so nowhere do we think about, are there some kinds of precautions that we can use with drive-through windows? Maybe, for example, just a light that would indicate that the drive-through exit is being used, entrance or exit, which would have some sort of warning to pedestrians and bicyclists. I mean, it could be a simple light thing that whenever the drive-through window is being used, somehow it's actuated so a light goes on that's red when people are pulling in and red when people are pulling out. But that's not in the legislation, and it's also not in the standards that the Board of Appeals would use, but it's maybe something that we can do to address some of the practical aspects of the subject to standards. But my question on the amendment is, why is B1 not subject to standard? Whereas every other one except for the PM2, and so why are those two not going to the Board of Appeals and subject to the standards that the Board of Appeals use to approve?
Frankly, just oversight, to be honest. I was mostly trying to focus on the standards of just building being within 1,000 feet of the school, major modification, or property being rezoned.
So as a friendly amendment, depending upon where we get with this, would you agree to adding, it says on all of these, they'll say permitted subject to standards, and then permitted subject to standards or subject to standards. I'm not sure how you really decide. I assume that subject to standards added onto permitted subject to standards is what sends it to the Board of Appeals. And so if we would add subject to standard for both B1 and the PM, and down and below we have PM2 also that, well, no, it's got some additional standards depending upon whether they're new residential zones. But anyway, then in this amendment, I would like to see subject to standards for all of them, which means they go to the Board of Appeals, at which time the public will have an ability to weigh in, and the Board of Appeals members would have the ability to determine whether some drive-through window is just really not suitable because of its location or whatever, versus, this is a typical drive-through window and we don't see any extenuating circumstances.
I accept.
Okay, so that would be an amendment that I would offer out of rules to change that table. Now, going back to the legislation itself.
Alderman, before you move on, please. Alderman Schnellmeyer, that amendment, at least in my mind, seems to negate much of the legislation.
Well, that's where I was going next.
Oh, okay, then I'll let you go next.
Yeah. So when you look at the legislation itself, and on page, where is it? I can't find it now. Am I in the legislation? Yeah, here it is. So drive-through windows, it says in, well, this says in the motion. What am I in here? It says drive-through facilities are prohibited. That means they're all prohibited, even existing ones. But maybe I'm not this is Amendment 1. This is Schnellmeyer Amendment 1. Why is that included with, I must be in the wrong place. That's what it is. So.
Actually, there's only one amendment, and that's the Schnellmeyer Amendment. Is that what you're looking at?
No, I'm sorry. I'm trying to go to the legislation itself, and I'm on page, I don't have page number, second page, 2164, 320, drive-through facilities are prohibited, period. And you're right, Alderwoman, that the amendment gets rid of the strikeouts right below that. But this says they're prohibited whether they're existing or to be created. It doesn't say new drive-through windows. Also, it doesn't deal with a lot of the technical questions we've been receiving from some of the organizations which deal with grandfathering. So, for example, a business has a drive-through window currently and is permitted. The business goes out of business and the property changes hands and a new business comes in. Is that drive-through window automatically grandfathered to the new business, or do they have to go through the new process? And I don't think we answered that in the legislation.
In the legislation, no. So that was the goal of this amendment, was to grandfather that process in. So I guess the example for that would be the old KFC location on West Street. I believe an Arby's is coming into that. that was going to happen regardless of legislation or not, but let's say it was being delayed. The goal of this amendment was it's the same style of business. The business building is not getting any major modifications, so it's fine. The permitted use was the same.
As this is submitted, as it's drafted, even with the amendments from the Economic Matters, and I haven't made a motion to accept those, but if we do get to there, on line 60, it needs some kind of modification to say something like new drive-through windows are prohibited. Not just all drive-through windows are prohibited, because that would mean all of the existing ones are now prohibited.
Mr. Reuter, as that written, as the amendment written, is his interpretation accurate?
All right, that point was discussed in the Office of Law, and it was the Office of Law determination that in the code, in the ordinance as it's originally written, once you the ban cannot affect existing structures. That's
That's constitutional.
That's vesting. That deals with those businesses already vested, so they have the right to keep what they already have. So it can only, if the ordinance can only impact, the ban in the ordinance can only impact going forward. So you don't need to say it's grandfathered. That would be essentially redundant in legal parlance. The amendment makes some exceptions to the ban. Therefore, all those strikeouts have to come back.
Alderman Arnett, are you clear? Because I'm not.
I can just tell you how the constituents that are and associations that are reading this are reacting to this line in the legislation. And they're perceiving it as saying drive-through windows are now prohibited, period. I think they're wrong in their perception by the intent of the legislators, but nevertheless, in plain language, it says they're prohibited. Now, I understand if you're already vested per the Constitution, we can't take that away unless we do it through some kind of eminent domain activity. That's like everything that is permitted by special exception is permitted in perpetuity. It runs with the property. And that kind of clarification that the drive-through windows running with the property rather than the business also handles that grandfathering issue. But I do have some concerns about the explicit wording in the legislation, and particularly if we go down to line 65 with the table and we amend it per the environmental matters, it says they're not prohibited, they're allowed subject to standard. So which is it? Are they prohibited or are they allowed subject to standard?
We have been joined by Mr. Lyles, who might want to weigh in on this. I would hope that this language would be written in such a fashion that the community, our constituents, can read it and understand it, and will not need the law department to translate it. So how do we address this information? How do we clarify it so that it is recognized that this does not take away any businesses that are currently in existence? And this is for new businesses, and whether it's new businesses or new construction, Mr.
Right.
Lyles?
Yes, Mike Lyles, a city attorney. Yeah, we were trying to determine that. It seemed that the amendment, at least, was contradictory to the main body of the legislation. We were trying to craft it in a way that didn't make it contradictory. The points you bring up are valid. We know that any legislation that affects drive-through windows will be prospective and will not have anything to do with drive-through windows that are currently existing. However, the amendment seemed to suggest that in the new ones that come, there will be an exception And so we were trying to parse that, and I think the call was made to the sponsor to try to help us with that. I'm not sure if we actually had that meeting yet, but that is an issue in legislation like this. In our view, if you're going to not have drive-through windows in the future, then don't have them. And if you want exceptions to that, then that seems to go against what you're talking about in prospectively banning drive-through windows. And that's part of the issue we have here, trying to parse out what the council really means. And I think it's up to the council to determine what it wants, and we'll be happy to get the
So
language
I do
right.
have a proposal to address this. If we accept the amendment, which I'm inclined to do, from the Economic Matters Committee, and we'll have to vote on that, but I would argue on line 59, we would simply change that to drive-through facilities are permitted subject to standards, and we drop line 60, and then we substitute at line 65
Mine
the
didn't.
table as amended by the the Economic Matters Committee, and with the two subject to standards additions that I'm proposing as an amendment to that amendment, a friendly amendment to that amendment.
Well, let
Does
me
that
ask,
make legal sense?
I'm not sure what subject to standards means.
That means that it has to go before the Board of Appeals and follow the standards that are set forth in Title 21, I think it's 2121, that sets forth all of the standards and criteria that the Board of Appeals has to consider in granting a special exception. And I've argued earlier in this discussion before you got here, Mr. City Attorney, that we may need to add some things to help the Board of Appeals that would deal with what are the kinds of things they would look for to determine whether a new drive-through window is presenting some difficulty or not. In other words, what would be their basis for denying a drive-through window? And one of them could be because of presents a clear and present danger to pedestrians and bicyclists.
So,
And those sorts of things. Like it's on a very congested, heavily traffic street, and it doesn't have any buffer. So a lot of these, like bank drive-throughs, are really buffered because they're not on a main street. They're in a bank parking lot, and they shouldn't really be a detriment to pedestrians. But if there was a drive-through window on Forest Drive, that may well be a public safety danger.
so
Alderman, thank you. I just spoke with Alderman Schandelmeyer to see if he's comfortable with postponing action to give,
we can find time to connect along with the primary sponsor and discuss this. Essentially, the entire purpose of this amendment was, I'm going to put this in like simplest language possible, if building with drive-through exists, can still use drive-through. Which was essentially just like the goal was to hyper clarify that, even if a new business came in. So we can find the time to talk on that. There is no real sense of urgency on this legislation. So
Mr. Lyles wanted to make a comment, I thought.
yeah.
Yeah, I think that the council seems to be going in different directions on this. Either we're going to
Is that new?
we're either going to prohibit drive-throughs or we're not. If we're not going to prohibit drive-throughs but create a separate category for distinguishing acceptable drive-throughs and unacceptable drive-throughs, that's a different piece of legislation I would submit.
Thank you. So I would propose that we postpone action to give the sponsors an opportunity to see how they can amend it so that it meets the concerns raised.
I shall second.
And it would also give Economic Matters an opportunity to address the legislation, because I see that they did not take a position.
We had kind of just, so that legislation, that amendment had been, we were trying to parse out how to come up with that during Economic Matters. I had submitted it after the meeting had concluded.
Okay. So
And
it's
then-
not Economic Matters. It says here that it's from the Economic Matters.
It was from our idea. I had submitted it, but we had not gone through and taken a position on it. But I had submitted it as like part of our discussion on the legislation itself.
Okay.
So,
So I will,
Madam Chair, if I may.
yes.
I've already stated in my opening remarks that in spirit, I like this addressing autocentricity, but in principle, I think there's a lot of things that I've raised that need to be worked out. So to the extent that you would like my help, I'd be happy to work with you too to go through some of the things that I brought up today.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so I will entertain, before we move on, Mr. Enton is in the audience, and I'd like to give him an opportunity to speak to us today.
Thank you very much. I need to
You can sit there, or you can go to the mic, the podium.
thank you very much. Here we have.
Would you press the button where it says push?
Thank you very much. I'm here on behalf of the Maryland Bankers Association. I did testify when the bill was heard in front of the full council. I've looked at the suggested amendments from the Economic Matters Committee. Just preliminarily, I would say, and I don't want to repeat what I said necessarily already in front of the full council, but this is just a one-size-fits-all, both from the definition, from who it affects and where it affects, where it impacts. And I've been coming to Annapolis as part of my legal services to the Maryland Bankers Association for 40 years. And today I drove down 450 and to West Street, and where 450 meets 2 is totally, completely different than, say, down where the Annapolis where the library is as you get closer to town. I mean, it's just a whole different ballgame. And I can see the need maybe from a public safety point of view, if you want to have, particularly in residential areas, if you want to have some kind of standards for drive-through, but to just have for the entire city of Annapolis to say you cannot have a drive-through, regardless of where it is, a new one. I understand you're going to grandfather a new one, regardless of where it's located, is problematic. But then on behalf of my client, it's a one-size-fits-all because we provide an essential service to the public. Whether I go to Wendy's or I go to Burger King or I go to McDonald's, I have so many different choices, but I can go or not go. But if I need to go to the bank, I need to be able to go. And if it's late at night and I don't want to get out of my car to walk up to an ATM, if I need to speak to someone about something I have and I got my kids in the car, we're an essential service. Pharmacies are essential services as well. So I would urge the committee, if you're going to pass this legislation, and I'm not saying you should, at least at a minimum to distinguish between the essential services and non-essential, but also to distinguish between locations. And that's why you have a zoning process. It seems to me the concerns that have been raised about this could all be dealt with through the zoning process and the permitting process without having to go through it here. So I look forward to, I'm available to work with the committee and with the Economic Matters Committee, but I do share the concern. The other question that I have, and looking at, as long as we're talking about it, looking at the amended language that was suggested, it says that drive-through facilities that have been permitted or special exemption uses prior to January 1, 2025 shall continue unless, so it's not a blanket grandfathering, unless the building is within 1,000 feet of a school, a major modification is made to the building, because this is after January 1, where the property is rezoned. I don't know, maybe the sponsor knows, I couldn't hear it. Is there one facility that's within 1,000 feet of a school, and what kind of business is that? Is it a bank branch? Is it a restaurant? Do you know?
It was a restaurant.
It was a restaurant, okay. And then the other issue that we raised, I think Evan Richards from the Maryland Bankers Association sent an email to the three of you. is, there's no definition of a major modification. We're just not sure. You're going to go ahead and plan all this, and then all of a sudden now you don't know whether you're going to be able to do it or not. It's going to be characterized as a major modification or not. And I don't know if there's some kind of definition you could come up with for that.
Major modification was chosen as the language because that was the language used in our code.
But once again, I would just say to the committee, it just seems to me that the main problem is, and I would only tell you this, that representing the Maryland Bankers Association, I represent a lot of other trade associations and corporate businesses, but the one thing that we continue to hear is a lack of banking services, particularly in underserved areas. And to us, I would hate to see a situation where you have an area that needs banking services within the city limits someplace, but because they can't have a drive-through, they're not going to put that branch within the city limits. They're going to put it outside the city limits. That's reality. You put yourself in the position of the bank. What are you going to do? Are you going to be inside the city limits and where you can't have a drive-through? Or are you going to be a half a mile or a mile down the road someplace for a new branch because you think that there's a need and you want to, it's going to make sense for you to open a branch within the city, but you're going to put it outside the city limits. We have a number of our members that are working very hard to locate new branches in jurisdictions throughout the state. I live in Owings Mills, very close to Pikesville, Maryland. We just had a Chase Bank branch open on Reisterstown Road. And that's an area that needs those services. So I thank you very much for letting me speak. I hate to ramble on, but this is an important issue for our members, and I wanted to make sure that you understood our concerns. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Questions?
Thank you very much.
So there's a motion to postpone action on 0624. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Actually, point of order, I apologize. Did it get seconded?
Yes.
Did it get seconded, the motion? Oh, okay. Yep, sorry.
So you're going to bring it back to the Rules Committee?
Yeah, we'll see you next month.
Yes, that would be great. Okay,
All right, and again, I'm happy to work with you, Brooks.
Yep.
thank you. Moving on, 01224 Maritime Industry Economic Development Fund. Ross, you want to
Yes.
speak to this?
Yes, I can. This is just establishing, when we passed ordinance 2521, which were the changes to the maritime zone, we created a situation where when people exercise their triggers to create more non-maritime use on their property, they would pay a fee based on square footage, but we have no place to park that fee. And the thrust of the legislation was that the fees collected would be used in furtherance of development or support for the maritime industry in Annapolis. So the director of finance said, please give me a place to park this. I'm not clear why we have to actually create it in ordinance, but I'm happy to do that. And there already have been fees that have been collected, and the director is sort of holding it to the side until it can go into this fee, which has, well, this is why the legislation, because the fund has specific uses. It's not something that just goes into the general fund. It has uses to support development of the maritime industry, including educational aspects, recruitment aspects for maritime workers, Blue Sea kinds of things. And those are the uses that this fund could be put to. So that's the purpose for this ordinance. And I would make a motion that we recommend and support pending discussion.
Well, I'll second that. And we heard this in finance, I guess it was on Wednesday. And what I heard Ms. Dickinson say was, this puts it in the fee schedule. that unless it was actually written in the schedule, then they couldn't park the monies anywhere.
Actually, this does not put it in the fee schedule. That's only done by resolution. But it does create a specific fund with a specific intended use. So that's the reason for an ordinance.
Ms. Buckland, did you have anything to add? Because obviously I misunderstood what Ms. Dickinson was saying.
So I think there are two things and somewhat separate things. As Alderman Arnett said, the use for the funds is restricted. So the creation of the fund itself, the ordinance then expresses the will of the council to restrict the use of those funds. The particular fee that's feeding this fund had initially not been on the fee schedule. And so there was a catch up. It had partially been set, but then hadn't made it onto the FY24 fee schedule. So that had, as indicated, that ends up being by resolution. So both of those pieces needed to be done, but they are separate issues.
So what's the status of the resolution? Have we passed it?
I believe it's on the I know it's on the FY24 fee schedule because I specifically checked to make sure it made it onto it.
All right, so this is the ordinance that puts it in the language.
Creates the
Yes.
fund.
That creates the fund, yes. Alderman Schindelmeyer, did you have a question or anything to add about that?
No, Madam Chair. Excuse me.
Oh, I'm sorry. Ms. Ruder, you had your hand up?
Cynthia Reuter, the legislative analyst. The reason there's an ordinance to create this fund is that because the ordinance that originally said there is going to be a fee for this new program said that there shall be a fund created, and the fund was not created.
Right.
So this just
Creates
makes
the fund.
happen what was supposed to happen many, many, many years ago.
Hey, we'll get to it.
Okay. So there's a motion to give a favorable recommendation to 012-24. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right. 13, we have done. 017, elections. Definitions for the purpose of updating the definitions in Title IV elections. And Ms. Leahy is here. Do you want to come to the table and tell us why we have all of these ordinances and how they impact the election process?
Hello. Eileen Leahy. I'm the chair of the Board of Supervisors of Elections.
Could you give us your address, please?
My address?
Your address.
110 Archwood Avenue, 21401. So, thank you for having me here today. There is quite a bit of election legislation that is before you, and there's actually some more to come. Much of it is coming about through some of the changes that we experienced with our last election, with the COVID restrictions and moving towards mail-in ballots, and also some of the reviews that have been done both by the Charter Revision Commission and also the Task Force on Elections that was completed this spring. So in taking some of those recommendations and also pulling out kind of what are the priorities for the upcoming election in 2025, the upcoming municipal election, these were the things that were addressed first and being brought forth to you.
So the first one, 017, speaks to definitions.
Right. And my understanding is part of the purpose of this is to pull the definitions into one place. That Cynthia can help me with that, I think.
So it looks like,
It kind of goes back to the mail-in ballot section. The state made significant changes to absentee ballots. They said now it's mail-in ballot, so we needed to change the definition, and that led to other definitions being updated. And rather than lumping it into one big ordinance, it was decided to separate them to make it easier for the council to consider.
Right. So many of these definitions are already existing in code. The ones that are underlined are the ones that have been updated. And again, much of it is to bring it in, not so much compliance, but bring it so that it's consistent with state election law, which is one of the areas that we're trying to move towards, which was recommended from the task force. An example of that might be provisional ballot. That's an example that shows you, that's number 37, that shows you what the existing code was, which is crossed out, and then we've put in what the code is in terms of state. And we've also added some that haven't been in our code before, but felt that we needed to identify them just mostly for consistency.
So this first ordinance simply speaks to the definition portion.
Yes.
And in red and underlined is all the new language
Correct.
that's being added to conform us to state standards.
Yes, I would say by and large, the new definitions came from the state with maybe some minor modifications. But again, it's for clarification. For instance, we didn't have a definition of canvas, and yet we talk about canvas all the time. So I think this will also be help in terms of voter information also.
Okay, questions for Ms. Leahy? Alderman Arnett?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. First
Miss-
one is,
Alderman, can I ask you to hold it off? Can we get this on the floor? Can we have a motion?
Oh, yes.
And then we can enter discussion.
So moved.
second?
Okay, discussion. Alderman Arnett.
Yeah, so definition number 9, chair, I guess you would have to go to 4.44 to understand, but is this the chair of the Board of Supervisors of Elections?
This refers to chair of a political campaign. So the chair is used in different forms in the city code. And so what this says is it, in terms of election law, this is what chair is defined as.
Okay,
it's
so then I would say that for me, since I already was mistaken, I think it should say chair of the campaign committee or whatever it's the chair of, not just chair.
Well, it says for the purposes, 4.44 means the leader of a political committee. And that's actually the terminology in the code.
On page 2, line 27.
Yes.
Yes.
Are you finding it? Is that,
I'm looking at it. I still find just chair in parentheses to be somewhat ambiguous, but I don't see it as a fatal mistake. There are references to Title 4, 44080, like campaign material and independent expenditure. Are there, I haven't looked at 4.44085. Are there changes being proposed or will be proposed to that section of the code?
At present, I'm not aware that we're changing any in that regard.
So it's just adding a reference here
Right,
to
and
those existing sections of code.
And I think some of it had to do, particularly like with independent expenditures, that it was such a large piece to put in here, it was easier to reference it because the definition is in code and is pretty extensive.
Right, okay. I just wanted to, since it is referring in red to that section, I just wanted to make sure that the things that are in that section are staying the way they are, or there may be some forthcoming additional legislation to make amendments in there in 4.44.085.
Yeah, I'm looking at the ones that refer to that, and I'm not seeing any that are currently under discussion.
Thank you.
Cynthia, do you?
Yeah, I can add some insight into that. There are certain sections of the election code that have definitions in those sections and they were not under the definitions that cover the entire Title IV. So we just wanted to let people know that if they're looking at the definition section of Title IV, if you want those definitions, you got to go to another section to find it.
Right. I appreciate that. And with that, those are the questions and comments I had. If no one else will, I will offer a motion that the committee recommend favorably on this ordinance.
We already have a motion on the floor. Alderman Shannemeyer,
Well,
did you
that's
have a question?
No, I'm just trying to go through some of these independent expenditure rules here. No, Madam Chair. Actually, yes. So basically, the goal is we're just trying to, as close as we can, until it like match word for word state regulations of this. Correct?
We're trying to be consistent with state code. So I wouldn't say all of them are word for word because we have tried to make them specific to Annapolis, the municipality.
Okay.
But yes, it's also just to define things for clarification so that people understand. Like, for instance, absentee ballot has taken on a different type of a definition now that we have mail-in ballots. And sometimes we find in elections that we use words that aren't the words used in the code. For instance, political committee is, usually we use the word campaign, but it's really a political committee. So that was an effort just to kind of clean it up also.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, Madam Chair, no further
So
questions.
I'll call the question. All in favor of a favorable recommendation for 017-24?
Aye.
Thank you. 018-24, elections, mail-in voting. Ms. Leahy, would you like to speak to for the purpose of replacing the entire Annapolis City Code chapter on absentee voting with state-required mail-in voting standards set in the election law and Maryland code?
Right. As I'm sure you all are aware, mail-in voting has become an option, a standard option in the state of Maryland. It was used in the last election in 2021 with success in Annapolis. At the time, it was utilized under a resolution, and so this is an effort to put it as an ordinance. It is an option for people that they have, it's going to follow the state law in that if you want a mail-in ballot, you have to request it. Okay, it's not going to be an automatic. We don't have the technology that the state has for doing it automatically. So what will happen is that if I want to do a mail-in ballot, well, let me back up. Everyone who is a eligible registered voter in the city of Annapolis will receive an application for a mail-in ballot. If they return that application and it's compliant, they will receive mail-in ballots for the 2025 election. If they don't request a mail-in ballot, they won't get a mail-in ballot. That differs from what we did in the last election, which was we sent out ballots to all registered voters. So that is a change, but that's also consistent with what the state of Maryland is doing. If you get a mail-in ballot, to clarify, and then you decide you want to do in-person ballots, this lays out also that you would have to put in a provisional ballot. So we'll do some education with that in terms of how that works for people. It does not take away in-person voting. There will still be in-person voting in all of the wards. It just is another option, and it is a replacement, so there's no longer absentee ballots as such. It's mail-in ballots.
Mm-hmm. So may I ask, and I don't want to speak out of turn, so will we ever go back to everybody gets a ballot in the mail? I mean, I know I'm asking you to predict the future, so that's, was it cost prohibitive? Was it unsuccessful as an approach?
Well, there are some practical matters. One of the challenges is people are concerned about mail-in ballots being delivered to addresses where the people no longer live. Mm-hmm. That is a concern. certainly if somebody picks that ballot up and they return it, they're committing election fraud. That's one. There is some, you could make the case that there is an economic piece to it because the city does pay for the mailings to go out and also for the returns. In this case, I know that there was a lot of debate at the state level in terms of doing it the way it had been done in the past presidential election versus this one. But the board opted to go with what the state is doing now. So it's pretty consistent with that.
Okay.
The way it's currently set up, each election, you will have to do that request. It won't be like in what the state does now, is if you opt in, you're opted in until you opt out. This way, you'll have to opt in every 4 years.
Okay, any questions for Ms. Leahy on 18?
It pretty much follows, I mean, as you can see, it's pretty much new.
Okay, I'll entertain a motion.
I will grant the motion, and I just want to say thank you for doing this update. I've actually always voted by mail every single election since I was allowed to vote, so having this put down into the code formally as no longer absentee, as vote by mail, is really exciting for me.
Is that because you were traveling in different locations?
Usually work, and then I just liked the convenience of it when I no longer had to travel for work or do things, so I just kind of kept doing it.
Our anecdotal observations in the last election was that we did increase turnout in certain categories of voters, particularly older voters and also people that may not have voted in a while did cast their vote.
Alderman Annette, would you like to second the motion?
Yes,
to give?
I second the motion. I also second the thanks for the work.
Yes, absolutely. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right. And as we're turning to the next ordinance, my dad, who's 100, gets his ballot in the mail automatically in Milwaukee, so he doesn't have to request it. And we did it before I left the last time, so he's already voted. I didn't do it. He did it before I left the last time.
Madam Chair, I actually just thought of a question on this. Is it
Sure.
too late to ask? If someone is automatically registered for mail-in, to receive a mail-in ballot on the state or on the federal and state cycle, would they receive it on the city cycle as well, or is that a separate registration request?
It's separate because we don't have access to that technology.
That makes sense.
And that's why the plan is to send out an application to all registered voters. And we'll also be addressing that with voter education to let people know you may have done it for the county, but unless you do it for the city, you won't receive a mail-in ballot.
Thank you for that clarification, and a preemptive thank you for the work that you're going to be doing on that.
You're welcome.
Okay. Moving on to O1924, elections ballot questions, for updating the procedures for ballot questions that can be requested for the 2025 election cycle.
Okay. We worked a lot on this. In the past, particularly in the past election, probably even further back than the past election, but also it came up in the Charter Review Commission and with the task force, is that the ballot question procedures that we have in the current code actually follow state code to some degree, but it never gave the percentage of people that were needed in terms of the petitioners. So it told you how, told you what you had to put in terms of getting the question and getting it out there. It told you the size of the piece of paper you needed to use, but it didn't say how many signatures you needed. And so it was just not there. The other thing that the city has not had is the opportunity for the city council to also put in a petition for a ballot question. Review for that shows that counties can do it and the state can do it, but that has never been put forth for the municipalities. It doesn't mean that other municipalities haven't done it, but in Annapolis, the city council could not put a question on the ballot. So this was an attempt to address those issues. So you'll find that the, starting on page 2, line 18, it talks about getting on the ballot. And so it includes by legislative action through a resolution adopted by the city council. So that does say that the city council could say, you know, there's an interest in, you know, nonpartisan is something that has always come up, nonpartisan elections. Let's find out what the voters want. So the city council could now do that.
Would that take 5 votes on the council?
I believe when we asked that question, it was whatever the current rules are on the, we did talk about a supermajority, and I think it was just left to make it the way the council rules are now. It doesn't have to be, I believe at the county level, it has to be a charter question, but we didn't specify that in this legislation. I know that there has been some questions about how that fits in with the rest of the process, because most of the rest of the legislation addresses how a group would go about, you know, getting the, you know, putting together the petition, drafting it, preparing it, gathering the signatures. We did include, looking for where it is, the actual numbers, the required signatures.
It's on page 3, line 30, I believe.
Right. So there are a lot of numbers at the state level that are out there, something like 30% if it's the governor, different things for ballot questions. So in reviewing them all, we decided to put forth that at least 10% of voters registered in the city of Annapolis, unless it's required by state law to be different. And so that would mean, for instance, if we say we currently have about 30,000 registered voters in Annapolis, the petition would have to have 3,000 valid signatures in order to be put forth. Most times in doing petitions of this type, petitioners are encouraged to get 20% more than what they need. And then that would need to be reviewed. One of the things that we felt pretty strongly about was that we wanted to make sure that this would also be something that was spread across the city amongst all 8 wards, and it wasn't something that would just be ward specific. And so that is why we've included that the signatures of at least 250 registered voters must be from each of the 8 wards. And that is a bit different than, say, the state.
I have to, well, you go ahead, Alderman Sandemeyer.
Yes, Madam Chair, I have 2 questions. One on that one you just brought up, and I apologize if I'm asking the question you also have. So the goal of that is essentially to just make sure this is genuinely like a citywide question or burning opinion. It can't be like dominated by, let's say, just a very organized contingent in 2 neighborhoods by the waterfront, and then the rest of the neighborhoods in the city don't particularly have strong opinions. So if that happens, like, they couldn't be brought forward. But if was that kind of the rationale behind it?
That was the intent, was that, you know, it wasn't just, it had to have representation from all 8 wards.
Oh, that's interesting. I can see pros and cons to that.
Well, I think the feeling was 250 wasn't too onerous.
No, I think it's a good rule. I just, yeah, it's a good idea. I just kind of, it's interesting. My second question, when you're talking about calling it charter questions, what the county does it, but we're not going to, is there a reason that we did not follow their lead in calling these like a charter, calling it a charter question?
No particular reason.
Does that impact anything at all, or is that just literally a minutia thing?
Is this in the charter, or is it just in the code? Because we only need a charter amendment if we're amending something that's in the city charter.
Oh, well, that's answers my
So
question.
if there's no section, and I don't know whether there is or not. Alderman Arnett, do you know whether elections is in the charter? I don't recall that it's in the charter.
If it would be in Article 2, I think. but I don't have it handy, so I can't look that up.
Okay.
It isn't in the charter.
Okay, it's
I mean,
not, so
Not
it
all
would
of it.
not.
I mean, but for instance, if there was, the two questions that came up with charter review was nonpartisan, that would be a charter change. Syncing in with the state cycle of elections, that would also be a charter change. My guess is that many of the things would be more charter oriented, but we didn't specify it.
So that would be more what the ballot initiative would be specific on whether it be called a charter question or not. And that's why it's better to just not specify in
Right,
this piece.
it would narrow the focus, certainly, if you just kept it to charter. So, for instance, let's say for mail-in ballots, I'll just use that, if we weren't going to mail-in ballots, but there were people that said, no, we want mail-in ballots and we want them to go to everybody. If we made it a charter only, that petition would probably not be able to be put on, because I don't think that comes in under the charter. It would come in lower in the election code. So,
Thank you.
Alderman Arnett?
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, I want to start by applauding the Board of Supervisors for another Herculean level of effort here, and I'm strongly supportive, but I do have some comments and clarifying questions. Starting on page 2, I like Alderman Schonnemeier's question about the nature of what the council can put on as a ballot by resolution, and I think it is good to make it more than just charter amendments, because I think there are other things that, and Eileen gave an example of one of them, but I think there's other things that are of interest to our residents, but they've really been prohibited by getting those questions out into the public because the former really high barriers to get a ballot question because of the signature requirements, which is taken care of in page 3 of this. I would want to ask about the exemptions. I'm wondering, is that coming from state law? So the exemption for a recall, an annexation, a bond, or it says any other ballot question otherwise governed by Maryland state law. So that gave me the sense that these exemptions were out of state law.
yes.
Okay. So that clarifies that. Now, again, when we go further into this, most of the language seems to be geared towards how you handle a petition, on a ballot question that is generated by petition. It doesn't have anything to do with what if it's generated by the council. And in fact, there's sections in here where the council reviews the petition. I think this is on page 4 or 5, the verification question, 44.40050, ballot question, petition verification, and presentation by the city council. That's clearly, to me, geared towards reviewing petitions, questions that come by petition, but it doesn't say what happens if it's a question that is generated by the council by resolution. Does there need to be something that talks about the council-generated ballot questions that is distinct from petition-generated?
Well, you raise a good point. On review of it afterwards, I mean, the feeling is that legislative action through resolution, so a resolution would be put forth, so it would go through that process. And so it would really make the rest of it somewhat moot, because as part of your resolution process, you would still need to go through the Office of Law and have it reviewed and then put on the ballot. I'm not sure if what would be helpful is to point that out, or
I guess that's what my sense would be, that these sections, as we proceed into pages 3 and beyond, are specific to ballot question generated by petition, not ballot question generated by the council. And I like the points that Alderman Shondermile brought up. The council would have to have at least 5 votes supporting a resolution, which means that it really can't be specific to one particular ward, or if it is, that the alderperson from that ward is going to have to generate support from at least 4 other wards. So that's a lot of vetting that will occur naturally for council-generated ballot questions. But it doesn't seem like most of this would apply to a council-generated ballot question. Now, maybe that just takes care of itself, but I just felt like it might want to have a little tweaking to separate the two. And then when you get down to page, whatever it is,
Line 20.
Right. If you look at page 2, line 20,
page 2, I don't have page numbers, so let me go back, line 20. Yeah, right.
again, so, which we pointed out, so it's by the legislative action through the resolution. So that almost just takes care of it. I mean, but I think what I'm hearing you is you want something to point out that the council doesn't need to do the rest of this.
Well, we will get back into it on page 5 or 6, where it talks about city council review and approval. But even there, that's, the city council shall review the petition. That means that it's a petition generated, it's a ballot question generated by petition. There's no review for a ballot question generated by council resolution.
That's correct.
That's correct. But your review goes through your resolution process.
Right. All right. So your sense is that this is self-regulating. We don't need to do anything to make it more clear, and that's fine with me. As I said, I support the effort and the direction that this is going. So it was something that struck me when I was reviewing the legislation.
Right. I would expect the only other thing that probably would refer also to the city council is on page 6, starting at line 1, the public notification of ballot questions. I believe that would probably be necessary, whether it was a city council initiated resolution, city council, and that would occur, public notification of ballot questions, that would occur closer to the actual election.
Yeah.
So it doesn't specify that it needs to be both, but any ballot question, no matter how it's initiated, would still need to go by that.
Okay, but that does bring up on that same page another thing that I saw, the statement of contributions and expenditures, again, presuming this only relates to petition-generated ballot questions, but I'm not sure do petitioners essentially set up like a committee, an elections committee, and would have a checking account and other ways to receive and expend funds? Is that the notion under section E here?
Yes. Yes, and that
Okay.
aspect is actually already existing in code. It's clarified,
Okay.
it may be reworded a little bit now, but yes, they have to account for all of their donations and all of their expenditures.
So I'm very glad you're here to help walk me through this. Madam Chair, that is the extent of my comments and questions.
May I ask, I remember, and Alderman, you'll remember this well also, on the effort to change our form of city government.
Yep.
And there was a rather significant campaign to get, I think it was 3,500 signatures
Yeah, it
to,
was 30% of the eligible voters. So it was a very high barrier.
Yeah, I don't think 3,500 wasn't 30%, or maybe it was. But they were not able to get the required signatures, and they had as I said, a pretty extensive campaign and did multiple mailings to each registered voter in the city. So did they go through, you said it was already in the code, so other organizations who have attempted to do similar things have had to go through and truly be an organization
They
in
should
order
have.
to get on, get a ballot question on.
They should have.
Okay.
I don't recall it happening during my tenure, though.
Yeah, this probably was about 15 years ago.
Right. And the 30% may go back to, I believe it's at the state level, something having to do with the governor. You have to have 30%. And we looked at all different aspects, and there's a lot of different numbers at the state level. And we picked 10% because we thought that, considering the size of the city and the number of registered voters, that it was a high enough level to make it, you had to really work at it, but low enough that it was attainable. The other option would have been 6,000.
No, I think you did a good job. I like that number.
Okay. Further questions? Hearing none, I'll do a motion on the floor. I will entertain a motion. We're just all over the place with our rules today.
I move a favorable recommendation by the Rules Committee.
Second?
Okay, further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
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 Okay. And the next one, 2024 election, surplus funds and reporting deadlines.
I know the campaign fund reports are near and dear to all of your hearts.
Yes.
Constantly.
So I'm going to separate these, if that's okay. The surplus funds came about partly because right now, currently, if you're closing your campaign, your surplus funds can either come to the city to help offset election expenses, or it can go to your respective central committee. At the state level, there are a number of different options that you can use, including charitable organizations. And we have in the past had some candidates who unfortunately read the state code and not our code and gave money and then had to reimburse their campaigns. We thought that the board thought that it was a worthwhile option to make it a third option, so that it wasn't just the city or the central committees, but to allow surplus funds to go to organizations, charitable organizations. And so I believe it's on page 2.
Line
So-
8.
So 8 and 9. So paid to the charitable contributions in the city of Annapolis that are registered or exempt from registration under the Maryland Charitable Solicitation Act. So we're very specific about the organization had to be in the city of Annapolis. We felt that we wanted it to benefit the citizens of Annapolis. So some people may feel like, well, I wanted to do something that's out of state or out of the city, but we felt that if we were going to go this route, we wanted to do that. The state allows you to do things like give to like some of the state universities and some things like that. They have a lot more options, but this was what we felt, again, was going to benefit the citizens of Annapolis.
I like it.
So that's the only really change in terms of surplus, that's surplus funds.
Can I stop you there?
Sure.
So I like on page 1, line 37, anonymous contributions. Is that the same thing as dark money?
Basically, I mean, you just can't have somebody give you money and not
Did
not
we
account for it.
seriously not have an anonymous contribution prohibition?
I think that's already in there, isn't it?
Yeah, it is in the
I think
current
we already
language.
have, yeah.
Yeah.
There's a title for it, so it must be there.
Yeah, right.
It's just
a
that the
finesse title.
surplus funds falls underneath anonymous contributions. So, Any other questions about the surplus funds component?
I personally believe expanding out charitable organizations to ones outside the city should be allowed, but I feel like I might be in the minority of opinion on that. Colleagues?
Well, I guess, I guess I like it the way it is personally, but if we find that there's really an urgent need to go outside the city, I still would like to see city charities prioritized.
All right.
Let me,
I'm sorry.
the monies were raised for the express purpose of helping a city official in the city, and I know I'm being redundant, so I would think that the money should stay generally for the same purpose, for the benefit of the city. So, I mean, unless you're raising funds to move to a different area, I'm not sure how that would work. But if the money is raised to support the Annapolis community, I think we should be consistent with that.
Okay.
Brooks wanted to go to the American Hospital Association.
Okay, what
America's
about the
hospitals.
timely reports? Is there,
Well, there we go. Now we're into one.
All right. So one of the things we found with the timeliness of reports, particularly once we're right before the actual election, is that there's just not enough time to review them before the next one is due. And let me back up. It's really to help with transparency. So right now, the way it reads is if you have your fund report set in, you have 30 days to amend it. We'd like to move that to 15 days so that right before an election, we can get that reviewed by the time the next one is due. Because what happens is, let's say fund report number 1 needs to be amended. Well, it may not need to be for 30 days. In the meantime, report number 2 is already due. So if there's a problem, report number 2 is going to be in error because report number 1 is in error. And the same, it just has had a domino effect. And sometimes it's just something small, but sometimes it can be maybe a donation was missing. And these are all being posted and people are looking at them. And so it's really in an effort for transparency so that people have the accurate reports before them. The general public has the accurate reports. And it also allows the Board of Supervisors of Elections who are doing the review to get them done also in a timely manner so that we can correct number 1 before number 2 is submitted, so that number 2 is going to be correct, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. So that is the reason for that. We've also wanted to start assessing fees, late fees, as a penalty for amended reports, because we find that the amended reports are not coming in a timely manner. Many of them are not coming in the 30 days. So again, this is an effort for really kind of addressing compliance. It's not meant to be punitive as such, but maybe motivational.
and the fee would be defined in the fee schedule? Because there's no dollar amount.
Yes, the fees in the fee schedule. Currently, and it also is confusing too, because the code states things like
Amendment, this is right.
pre-election reports versus post-election reports, and it's not really clear by definition what that is. So it's also just saying all reports. Because
Would you say that again? I'm sorry.
it's confusing as to what's a pre-election report as opposed to a post-election report. One could say that a post-election report could be a pre-election report the following year. So we've also tried to just make it
Okay.
all reports and not make them different. And some of this is just tweaking of the actual verbiage. I don't know, do you want me to go through piece by piece?
I'll do that for
Only
you.
if, Alderman, are you saying yes, you want her to go through this piece by?
No, I was saying I do have almost piece-by-piece questions.
Okay.
Okay, why don't we let you ask the questions?
Okay. So starting on page 3, timely reports, with A, it's requesting 5 years of information, which could apply to Alderwoman Finlayson and I, and almost Alderman Shond. Well, I guess you would qualify for that too, but why does that affect a new candidate? There's no 5-year history, and why do we need 5-year history? And isn't a lot of that history already posted and publicly available?
And Madam Chair, if I may piggyback off of my colleague's question, even if I have had 5 years of history, I've changed treasurers because my first one moved. I don't have 5 years of history with my current treasurer. So what do? It kind of seems a bit of a weird barrier instead of just requiring this with the current treasurer and candidate instead of just,
Right.
I don't understand it either.
And I'm trying to understand, I'm not clear myself in one respect. I think the intent is that you need to keep 5 years of your receipts and 5 years of your information. So if you don't have 5 years, you don't have them, but you would keep it, like if you had this year, you would keep it for the following 5 years. If you have different treasurers, it's still the candidate's responsibility to have those. So you would get them from your different treasurers. I don't know, Cynthia, do you recall the discussion on this, or I'd have to look at it again.
Well, let me ask, I think the question my colleagues are asking. We submit reports. You have them on file. You send them back to us you send them back to us once everything has been validated and we make amendments as needed. So, and it's asking for reports and statements. It's not asking for receipts. So
Correct.
now are you saying that you want 5 years of receipts? You already have 5 years or however many years there are of reports and statements.
I'd have to go back and look at 4.44080 because I'm not clear myself. And you're right, as far as receipts, I'm thinking of another section. I know that the city is required to keep all of the information on elections for 5 years, and it may point to that. So I'd have to check on that. I don't want to, and I don't have the code in front of me.
If I may, Madam Chair?
Yes.
The general context that I'm viewing this is that essentially, given the amount of money we're paid, council members are volunteers, but most definitely our treasurers are. And I have had 2 campaign treasurers. I'm about to have a third because the current one can no longer do it. And it is a lot of burden. I was asking for an estimate about how many hours a week the treasurer's report, and it does fluctuate during the period, but it can be 5 or 6 hours out of a week when there's a reporting required. That's a lot of imposition for a volunteer position, and quite frankly, it makes it somewhat hard to recruit treasurers. So when I'm looking at this, I am looking at it clearly from a self-interested point of view of how do I operate getting a treasurer and keeping a treasurer happy doing stuff for me for free. They got to like me a lot. And the more we add burdens, and 5-year burdens is pretty intimidating to me. And that's only if it's the reports, which is Alderwoman Finlayson reports you already have. They're already on file. They're already on record. So I just really have some discomfort with this A1 and the constraints that are in there, and would really like to see that reevaluated.
Well, I'm happy to review it and to come up with some clarification.
Okay, I appreciate that.
You know,
And you've always been great, so we love working with you. I appreciate that. Going on to the late fees and daily fees, and I have a former opponent who hasn't filed for a couple of years now. Do we really expect we're going to collect these daily fees? I mean, putting it in here means it really needs to be realistic. But also, I was looking because I remember when I had to pay a late fee, it was me personally who had to pay it, not my campaign fund. And I don't know whether that's in these new changes or not. Is the fee paid by the campaign fund or is it paid by the candidate?
it's paid by the candidate. It was discussed quite a bit through the board and felt that we wanted to keep the code as it was and not through the campaign. I think that also just spoke to personal responsibility on behalf of the candidate. When doing these reports, up until 2000, I forget when did I come on? This is my third term. So when I first started my first term, it was before that, all of these reports were done by an accounting firm. And what the board at that time found was that the accounting firms were checking the math, but they weren't necessarily checking code. And so the board took on the responsibility of reviewing all of these reports. And so the board also volunteers, reviews all these reports. I would say when we get these reports, usually at least 50%, if not more, need to go back and then get reviewed again by the board, by two people. And they frequently are little mistakes. And I understand the frustration, but that's where this is coming from. And we're also trying to make sure that the general public has the transparency so they're seeing corrected reports. If we looked a few years ago into going into an automated system similar to what the state has, and we were told we couldn't piggyback onto the state, and when we got bids for doing one for the city, at the time, it was $300,000, and that did not include annual updates and maintenance. If we were to go to the state system, it's a much easier system because theirs is automated. So if you make a mistake with your math, boom, it tells you right away. If there's an aggregate that's over the certain amount of money that's by law can be contributed, boom, it tells you. So that's kind of where we're coming from. It's not necessarily meant to be punitive, but it's really just trying to get it so that these things are done to completion. We're also looking at the form, and we're working with MIT to come up with some spreadsheets that can be consistent across the board. So I'm sorry, I know that Alderman Schnellmeyer, you had your hand up.
Doesn't the fact that over 50% of these come back for little mistakes kind of speak to the little bit of the over-complications and minutia of some of this? Like, I do come from a compliance background. I get we want things to be proper, but you look at like, oh, this is a transfer, not an expense, or this is a contribution and not well, actually, the contributions are contributions. That one's easy enough. Right. But like, some of these things are a little bit peculiar and picky. Like, wouldn't a scaling back of that to a more simplified system be easier for candidates who file in, especially especially for treasurers? These are volunteers,
right?
Coming in, and when if you look at for people at home going, oh, these politicians are just trying to protect themselves. Like, no, if you're a challenger going up against someone, like, this helps you file against us too. So like, you all want this to be simple.
Right. No, the one point that you make out, the transfers and all of that is something that's confusing even for the board. And that is one specific thing we're looking at. We're looking at seeing if we can do something. The fund reports, the format has not changed a lot in the past couple of cycles. But a lot of what's on there is determined by code. And it also is a good compliance. And maybe that's, in large part due to my 40 years as a nurse. If you make a mistake, you date it and you initial it. That might be considered minutia, which I can appreciate. I see that, but again, we're trying to make it so that it's transparent to the public. So when you have blank pages, we ask that they be ripped through. So I hear what you're saying. And again, we've offered training to treasurers. We've offered it in the past. We're happy to work with any of the treasurers to make this as easy. And we are looking at, like I said, the fund reports, particularly where there's people, you can submit Excel spreadsheets, but not every campaign uses the same Excel spreadsheet. So we're trying to get that in terms of the template. So.
Also, I apologize, Madam Chair,
No,
if I
go
may
ahead.
one
Go
more.
ahead.
The late fees. So state law, when I was treasurer of a committee registered under state law, it was the committee that paid the fee, but the treasurer and chair personally backed it up. Why have we decided to maintain our separate status from that? I know we can't piggyback onto the state system, but we do try to align with things. Is that just, again, to stress the personal responsibility for the candidate to get these things in time, or?
Well, we discussed it. It also, one of the things we've been looking at in terms of the types of contributions is a point that Alderwoman Finlayson said earlier. People are contributing to campaigns to further the campaign of a candidate, not necessarily to pay their late fees. One could look at it that way, which is, a compliance thing. I'm just repeating one thread of the type of thing that was discussed.
May I ask, could, in your example, because the campaign committees, the central committees and like, have to file reports also, do they not?
Yes.
So could that have been that late? Never mind. He was asking a question. He was saying that the campaign paid the fee, the late fee. And I'm asking, could it have been a campaign committee like a central committee that had a late fee, and that's why the committee paid it and not the individual?
Yeah, I do know at the state level, if you have a late fee, it can come out of campaign funds. It can come out of campaign funds.
Well, since he's gone, and I'll ask the next question, then I'll come back to you, Alderman. On page 3, we're talking about the fees again, payment source. Currently, it is the candidate who pays, but this makes it look like it's new language. It's not, correct? I think you said that was already in our code. Letter A, line 37, I'm sorry, didn't give you all the information.
I think it was probably a rewording of it.
Okay,
So it's new in terms of the wording, but not in the intent.
okay. Okay, Alderman Arnett.
Yeah, so on that point, Alderwoman, I'll just be direct. I'm feeling that this is a little too heavy-handed. And on that particular point, I really do feel, first of all, it's usually not the candidate that makes the mistake, it's the treasurer. But it's the candidate's personal funds that have to go to pay this fee. And I'm certainly thinking about an amendment to make that go to the campaign treasury. But that's something we can talk about when we get to amendments to this legislation. But I do have further comments as we go on.
Could I just ask a question along that line?
Yes.
The situation could exist that a campaign does not have sufficient funds to pay a late fee. So that would also need to be taken into consideration.
I think that's a good point, and I accept that. I'm not sure. I mean, are you saying that the candidate becomes the guarantor of the campaign finances if the campaign treasury is not sufficient?
I'm just saying
So
that
I
that
think we
needs,
need to say that explicitly.
yeah, I mean, I'm just bringing it up that that situation could occur. So if there was interest in changing it, I think Cynthia has something to assist with.
You may as well just sit down there and,
So she's pointing to page 4, the top. These fees will be considered a personal liability of the candidate and treasurer. So that's what we're talking about. But I guess you could, it would stand to reason that if there were insufficient funds, it would go back to them. But if you change it, it needs to be specified.
Right. So that's something and I'm not sure I'm prepared to do it at this meeting, so I will probably ask that we carry this legislation over for further consideration, this particular ordinance. But this isn't just, I mean, it is hard. I can tell you right now, it's hard to find a replacement for my treasurer, but it's also hard to find candidates. We're not offering a lot of money to do this, even though it is more than a full-time job, depending upon how diligent you are. And we're also finding that it's either retired people who can afford to do this because they don't have to work for a living, or people who are working for a living. Brooks, I don't know how you and Rob and Dewan balance it, to be honest. I don't think I could be working full-time and also do what I feel I need to do to carry out my job. But these are little incremental things that kind of discourage running for office. And so I think it carries over to a broader specter than just campaign. Now, I will admit, on the other hand, we really do want people to file timely and correctly. That's a goal that is in conflict with the level of burden. You know, for my recent thing, the treasurer for years had put the bank fees in as a other transaction and hadn't defined it, and had been acceptable. And then all of a sudden, this is a new thing. She was out of town, I was sick, and we barely made it in on time. But those are kind of aggravations when you're trying to do the big job of being an alderman. Plus, we're only part-time, so the job of living the rest of our lives. So I am looking for a balance here. I understand the need for compliance and enforcement. On the other hand, this can be kind of irritating, to be blunt about it, when you're trying to trace down these loose ends that I'm not sure how really critical they are. So I'm definitely thinking about a balance here, and I'm just being very direct and candid about that. But I certainly would look for a rejoinder from you.
Well, most reports are handed in on time, and so the fee changes was going right now. It's like during a election year, it's $20 a day, up to a maximum of $500. Okay, for other times of the year, and again, this is where it was confusing what's pre-election, what's post-election, it was $10 a day up to a maximum of $250. So it doesn't go on, completely, but we have had some candidates that literally have gone over a year and not filed their reports, despite many efforts to sit down and, so again, it's not meant to be punitive, but it's meant to get the information in on time, in a mechanism so that it can be made available to the public. We can certainly look at that. It's just not something that we really felt needed to change at this point to make it for the campaign. Again, the feeling was that campaign contributions were for campaigns, not for necessarily late fees. You could technically fill out the front part of your report and hand it in, and the rest of it could be blank, and technically it's been submitted, and you're not going to get a late fee. And the way it is now, you have 30 days to amend it, but you may not, but there's nothing saying you have to get it in 30 days. So you could, and people have done this, let it run out. So this is really just an effort to kind of, get everybody in, try to get these reports reviewed, and if questions are there, and put forth. Again, I just also want to make a notation that as elections have been changing over the years, we are seeing in these reports, there are contributions coming in from places like Act Blue. There are PACs that are coming in. So these are the types of things that we're also looking for and and we're willing to work with the candidates and sit down with them on any of that. So again, I know that this seems to be a specific point that I can certainly bring back to the board and we can discuss it some more.
Well, I'm expressing my personal views. I'm not sure they're shared by the rest of my colleagues on the committee or the rest of my colleagues on the council, but I do have to register that it does feel somewhat onerous, and I need to think about it.
Okay, one thing that we did do, and if you go to page 4 on line 27, what we did include, which is not in code now, but we did include a fee waiver. So a candidate can seek a fee waiver, and that is consistent with the state. And so let's say you didn't get it in because your treasurer was sick or there was a valid reason. There is a mechanism that you can come to the board and say, I'd like this fee waived because of that. And so there needs to be, we're in the process of, if this is passed, we'll need to come up with a form that can be provided. So that is a caveat that you might want to consider, still making it the responsibility of the treasurer or the candidate, but there is a mechanism which they can ask for a waiver.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, and it may get exercised a lot.
It doesn't really come up. I mean, most of the late fees are $10, $20. When we hit somebody with $500, I'll be on. It's like pulling teeth, and there's usually something else behind what's going on, and it's not the late fee.
Right. They live in Texas now.
Right, but you had alluded that has been completed. If we're talking about the same person, to my knowledge, all of the campaigns have either closed out or are compliant.
Oh, may I ask, do we have a lot of cases where the candidates have been unsuccessful and they've just walked away from it all? Not done a report, not registered anything? I mean, does that happen? Or?
Yes, it happened in the last election. It's probably happened it happened in the last one, the 2021. I think it happened once before. This last election, we got to the point where we were actually making a filing to the circuit court for a misdemeanor because, we just couldn't get the information. Mm-hmm. And so, it wasn't really about the late fee, it was about compliance and submitting the forms that need to be done. If you don't comply and you are a successful candidate, you cannot and you owe money, you can't be sworn in. But if you lost the election, it can just be drawn out. So we haven't changed that part of the code. That hasn't been changed and tried to be strengthened. I mean, it's a long process and you have to go through a number of things which the board has done. So we didn't change that aspect.
Okay, thank you.
So I do have one more question, Madam Chair, if I may.
Okay, you may.
I'm on page 4 and I'm on line 10, and it talks about sanctions and it refers to section Title 4, 48.210. I'm not there, so I don't have the code, and maybe Cynthia can help us. What are the sanctions? Because sanctions is an ominous sounding word.
I'd have to go back to 4.48.210. I believe that's the section, the sanctions are about taking office. I think that's what it refers to. We're looking it up. You have it here if you want.
Oh, I know. That's the wrong one.
As much as I think I'd like to say I could know all of election code, I don't.
Clearly, I don't either.
448-210. Did you want me to just read it?
Please.
Yeah.
A person, the title is misdemeanor penalty.
Yeah.
A person violating this chapter is guilty of a misdemeanor and, upon conviction, shall be punished as provided in Chapter 1.20 of this code. A person convicted of a violation of this title is ineligible to serve as mayor, alderman, election judge, board member, or employee of the board for a period of 4 years following the conviction.
So that's pretty heavy duty. I know it's not new, and maybe it's appropriate, but running up to your $250 or $500 and still not coming through presumably would make you eligible for sanction. If you're already in office, would maybe make you stop being able to stay in office or certainly run again for office. So these aren't light things, and they're not meant to be light, but I guess I'm feeling intimidated and a little bit of heavy-handed. But again, that could just be me, so I would yield to my colleagues on any thoughts about this. But we're not kidding around here. I mean, this could amount to serious things. And we are now presented with this legislation. It is ours to accept, reject, or amend. And I think I've been giving you a sense of the feelings I'm having. I don't have specific recommendations at this point, but if it's just me, I'll just go into my corner and shut up.
Well, Alderman, I think you're making some salient points, and I think Ms. Leahy has been making notes about things that we could tweak, amend. Am I wrong, Ms. Leahy? That was my hope, I guess. Anyway.
I certainly can bring back to the board, the discussion we've had about changing to allow campaign funds to be used for late fees. That wasn't a change in this legislation, so we were leaving it the way it was. The same in terms of sanctions. That's not a change. That's current code. To my knowledge, we've only needed to use that twice since I've been on the board, once in this last election and once in a previous election, and it was actually an elected official that owed $500, and that got him to pay because he or she was getting the oath in a couple of weeks. It's not meant to be punitive, but it's meant to have compliance and to have candidates comply with the law and comply with transparency to the voters. That's the issue. It's really, voters want to see where the money's coming from, and they want to have it so that they can look at it and feel that it is complete and it is transparent and it's not exact, and if you don't do it, it casts a shadow on, if we have on our websites, 10 people that are compliant and the reforms are there, and then you've got other ones that they're not there because they haven't been compliant, that's going to impact what voters might see if they choose to look at that. So it's not, the two things that you're bringing up are things that are not necessarily changes, but what I'm hearing you is that you'd like to have them looked at again and perhaps be a change. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes, I'm
correctly?
chafing.
Well,
Yes, and I think it was probably 2 terms ago, wasn't aware that there was, that this was expected to be paid by me, and I was 3 days late, and I paid $60 out of my own pocket. And I certainly learned a lesson, if that's the intent, but it wasn't my failure, it was a failure that I was unaware of by the treasurer, but again, that's a volunteer. And I am really looking at the broader issues of both recruiting and asking people to give us their time as treasurer, but also making it palatable to throw your hat in the ring to run as alderman for what is really an honorarium, not any kind of salary. We're certainly below minimum wage, what we're getting paid. And I was looking at Alderman Kendall Charles when she was enumerating the amount of time that she spends doing constituent service, which isn't really our job. Our job is the legislators, and yet we really are doing a lot of constituent service, ward boss kinds of activities. And I was impressed with the amount of time, and then I started thinking, well, I'm doing that too. Maybe I need to be enumerating that, and for not a lot of money. So you're doing it out of love, and you have to have the desire to do this. And we're not having a lot of people stepping up to give that desire. And so things that are detrimental to getting a broader pool of people interested in office are things that I worry about. So that's what I'm going to say. Enough said.
Alderman Channemeyer?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I share my colleagues' concerns with some of the higher punishments and higher burdens. I think this actually kind of chest thumps challengers out even more. Incumbents, you have a little bit more of a cushion. It's a little bit easier to get someone to help you out. When you're just starting in this, getting that treasurer is one of the biggest barriers because you're new. You're trying to take on an establishment, and I'm looking this at a way to, how do you open it up to a new person in the process? And if you make it a little bit harder, it makes it that much harder for them. I do fully understand, though, the desire to keep everything transparent. I understand the desire to keep late fees, ensuring that they're filed. We don't want to see 5 finance reports filed perfectly on time and then 2 off kilter or however many off kilter. But yeah, I do share my concerns with my colleagues' concerns. I guess I have a point of procedure or question on this front, Madam Chair. Do we send it back to the board for their edits, or do we try to edit it ourselves today or edit it at a further meeting?
That was what I was going to ask Ms. Leahy, what her preference is, because we do have 2 choices. We can ask the committee to review the concerns that you heard today and bring us some amendments, your own amendments, or it really wouldn't have to be, well, should be amendments. Or you can leave it to us to do what we want. I hate to put it that way, but to amend it to address our concerns. I personally would rather you take it back to the committee and have a discussion and see if they're willing to kind of see it the way we see it as the elected folks. And I might remind us that this is not just about the 9 of us, but there are others like the committees that have to file these reports on a regular basis also. So whatever standards we put in place, it's applicable to everybody. So how would you, I mean, we can postpone action as a committee and put it on a future agenda and have continuing discussion with you bringing back some ideas for changes.
Okay. I'm happy to bring it back to the board. I'd just like to clarify a couple of things, just to make sure I'm getting it correctly. So the payment source, I just want to verify, that is not a change that's being proposed. That's current code. So you're asking us to look at it with the idea of perhaps changing it. The other piece is the sanctions component, which is again not a change. It's maybe the verbiage reference is different, but that's not a change. So you're asking us to look at that. And I guess my question would be, what would be the alternative? So are you wanting the board to consider taking it out and there would be no sanctions, or a different sanction?
May I, Madam Chair?
Alderman Nanette, yeah.
So I know, look, I understand the responsibility of the Board of Supervisors and that you really are representing the residents of the city, and you need to hold us to a line of accountability. I get that, and I appreciate all the efforts that you do. And I would offer that maybe we want to look at page 4, the exceptions. Maybe if that was made a little more meaty. Right now, it sounds pretty clearly like you come to the Board of Supervisors to ask solace, who are the very people that have told you that you're in arrears or inappropriate to begin with. And it's not clear to me what would be a good excuse if I came back and said, well, my treasurer was sick, or I didn't know I needed to do that. This is the first time it's come up, or whatever it is. So maybe that section, which I believe is new, you indicated, is something that could be more fleshed out to dampen some of the concerns about being found guilty of a misdemeanor or having to pay $500 out of your own pocket. But I was trying to be very candid and convey to you as a candidate, a longtime candidate, some of the unease that I felt in reading some parts of this particular ordinance, and I'll leave it at that.
To answer your question about the fee waiver, there would be a draft of a form. I can have a draft of the form available if you wanted to look at that, because it does specify the types of things. And again, that was put in an effort to give the opportunity for people to say, wait a minute, there was extenuating circumstances. It wasn't just that my campaign neglected completely. So I would venture to say some of that would probably occur with, so I can also provide that.
That would be helpful. Thank you.
Alderman Schnellmeyer?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Something that I would like clarification on, not necessarily a change, like a fundamental change, but this is on page 3, line 21, the A portion. Number 1, starting on line 22, going down to line 24, all reports or statements. What I interpreted that as was very different than what you said, where it's basically we should have records of our up to 5 years of reports if we have them. Right, yeah. Could we make that language a little more clear if that's what it's asking for? Because what I saw is if you have to have 5 years of reports by the candidate or that same treasurer and no wiggle room, and you have to be able to file them at that instant. And
Right, I'll have to look at that. So I'll have that on my list, because I'll have to look and find out exactly what's required in those 2 section codes. So I'll look at that and see if that needs to be clarified.
Because when you said it, it's like, oh, no, just have 5 years of reports. I'm like, oh, yeah, that makes sense.
I think that's what it refers to, but I'm not sure that that's what's written actually accurately reflects. But I'll certainly look at that, and I'll bring that on when we meet with the board at our next meeting.
Thank you.
So.
Well, may I add something to that? I would rather we acknowledge the fact that we keep 5 years or more in-house, as opposed to putting the burden on the candidate You know, I mean, it's a responsibility, of course, but it just seems redundant if you're asking the candidate to give you 5 years of reports that you already have filed in the city.
And actually, the city clerk mentioned that when we were discussing it before the meeting, that it might be redundant. But again, I'll look at it and clarify that. I do have one more question. I believe that the fees and penalties has already been, that legislation's already been approved? Is that,
For the current budget year, yes, right?
so?
No, were there new fees?
Well,
or changes
there were
to-
there were changes to the election fees in that.
That is on the agenda on October 14th.
Okay, so it's still in process. And so if you could give me that feedback in terms of what we're asking is to start assessing late fees for amended reports.
The language you wanted to clean up so that,
It's not in this, it's in penalties and fees, but you've kind of referenced it and it's part of this. I don't think has that come to this group yet?
No, it
That
doesn't.
goes to the
It went
finance.
to the Finance Committee. It was recommended favorably on September 18th.
Okay, so the Finance Committee has seen that and has recommended favorably to adopt those changes. But since it's part of this, I just wanted to get feedback.
so that's a resolution that we've already approved?
It's a resolution to change the fee schedule, and it was only referred to the Finance Committee. And it is tentatively scheduled to be on the October 14th City Council agenda.
But it doesn't just speak to this fee change, does it?
It does.
So how did the Finance Committee rule on it?
Favorably.
Okay.
And so that means that there's not a two-tier, there's not $10 for post-election and $20 for pre-election. It's just a $20 late fee per day for a maximum of 500. And then it also applies now to amended reports. If they are not, there's 15 days now. So there'll be 15 days in which you can file your amended report. After that, then the late fees begin.
Then I think we should try to make sure these two pieces travel together, as opposed to letting the fee change go into effect and we're still working on the language. Caitlin, could you put the two pieces of legislation, the ordinance and the resolution, together? I don't need to come to finance, but I would hold the resolution until we get the ordinance worked out.
That would be a council decision when the resolution comes up before the full council.
Well, we can request, since it's our agenda, to not have it come before us until the ordinance is ready. Can we not? Isn't it our agenda to do that?
Yes, when the agenda is before the council and you're considering whether to accept the agenda, you can move to have that removed.
Can I do that now?
Not as a single council person. That's
Well,
a full
there are
council
three of us
decision.
sitting here. Can we not?
It is
make
not
it-
pending before this committee. So therefore, you don't have jurisdiction.
We don't approve the agenda. Okay, so it's out of our hands. I should,
It'll probably come
Okay.
underneath this
It comes up on regular.
when we talk about it again, right?
it's our agenda, and okay, we'll figure out a way to make it happen.
Madam
Sorry,
Chair,
how complicated.
Yes, Alderman Arnett.
is it appropriate at this time to make a motion that we postpone consideration of 2024 till our next meeting pending further refinements or conversation with the Board of Supervisors of Elections? If so, I make that motion.
I can second that motion, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of postponing 2024 until the next meeting, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Ms. Leahy, thank you, thank you. Ms. Reuter, thank you for your assistance. And sorry to send you back with homework. But it never ends.
Madam Chair, I want to echo your thanks on this. Ms. Leahy, you've done tremendous work on a lot of this stuff, especially on campaign finance. That is the most complicated part of election law. And you are doing really fantastic work on this.
Well, thank
and
you.
I know you're coming at this as a volunteer on a commission, and thank you.
You're welcome. There's more coming, so we'll be
And may I
meeting.
also add my
We'll be meeting
thanks
again.
and my feelings of guilt about adding to your workload. But you also did promise us there's more ordinances to come, so the work never ends. But I do appreciate your efforts and the efforts of the board.
Thank you.
Oy vey.
All right, may
One more
I,
thing.
well, and no, because, and I'm going to take a point of personal privilege and change our agenda, because Mr. Mercer has been sitting here for 2.5 hours waiting for us to address his appointment to the Board of Elections. You still want to do this, Mr. Mercer? So I'll ask my colleagues to indulge me as I invite Mr. Mercer up so we can address his approval for appointment to the Board of Elections. Would you like to come up and have a seat with no objection?
I have no objection, Madam Chair. Just which AP was this, 53 or 54?
54.
Okay, thank you very much.
Does Alderman Arnett have a copy? He does not. Okay.
Alderman Arnett, I'm going to email you. I found it in Legistar, so I'm going to email you the link to access it, if that's all right.
That's much appreciated.
Sending it to you in about a minute.
So it's AP 54 is what you're getting. So, Mr. Mercer, first of all, I do apologize for you having to wait so long. We should have moved these items up on the agenda, but we just got them this afternoon, so I do apologize. So thank you for being here. Give us your name and address, and then if you'd like, tell us a little bit about why you still want to be on the Board of Elections.
Just sent it to you, Alderman Arnett.
Thank you.
My name is Liam Mercer. I live at 43 Dean Street, Annapolis, Maryland.
Microphone on.
Oh, it had a green light, but there's an even greener light. So my name is Liam Mercer. I live at 43 Dean Street, Annapolis, Maryland, 21401. I have always been interested, well, I've always been, I've always recognized the importance of elections in our democracy, and I was notified that this was becoming an open position and felt like it was an important opportunity to serve the city of Annapolis. I really truly believe that fair elections that give everybody an opportunity to participate are incredibly important, and I would be honored to serve on the board to ensure that that happens.
Well, thank you. Can you give us a little bit about your background? Are
Sure.
you a native Annapolitan?
I'm not. I grew up in the Baltimore area in Catonsville. I went to school at the University of Maryland and spent time in different parts of Maryland, but now live in Annapolis. And I work in affordable housing development in Annapolis as well.
You're on the wrong committee.
Go on, I'm sorry. Oh, okay.
I'm happy to answer any other questions about my background.
Okay, Alderman Chandler.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Something, Mr. Mercer, thank you so much for your interest in this committee. It is one of the most technical ones that we have, and the stakes are very high because we want our elections to be full of integrity and secure. And something very interesting I see in your letter of interest is that you worked during the 2020 cycle for a presidential campaign securing ballot access in one of the primary elections. I'm not going to ask which campaign, which partisan side, because I don't think that's relevant, but I do think what is relevant is you have that direct experience, and I think that is going to help you in this position. So I'm very happy to see you here in front of us. I also like your current day job, but we need people in this committee, so I'll focus on that part.
Yes, yeah, no, that was an eye-opening experience to work on a campaign on ballot access and to kind of peel back the layers of election logistics in multiple states. And yes, yep.
All right, Alderman Arnett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I also appreciate both your background, but also your willingness to serve. I hope it's sort of fortuitous, but I hope that by witnessing this committee work today, you recognize we also take it seriously, and we have recognized the heavy load that the board carries and the work that they've done faithfully for the city over the years. So I think you have chosen a good committee to be on, but I'm sure along with Alderman Schneidermeyer, we are interested in your affordable housing experience. So thank you for volunteering.
Thank you.
Then I'll entertain a motion, Alderman.
I would like to give a favorable recommendation, Madam Chair.
Second?
All right, further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of giving Mr. Liam Mercer a favorable recommendation for an appointment to the Board of Supervisors of Elections?
So moved.
Ms. Alderman Arnett, was that your vote too?
Yes.
I said
my
so
vote
moved
is
instead
aye.
of yes. I said so moved instead of yes.
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Mercer, your name will go before the full council, I guess, at the next meeting. No need for you to be there unless you just want to come and enjoy the festivities. But thank you, and I'm sure someone will be in touch with you.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, going on to R44. Fund authorization for Housing Authority of the City of Annapolis. This is the mayor's legislation, and there's one amendment from Alderman Savage. Alderman Schneidermeyer?
Yes, Madam Chair. There is a second amendment, one handed out by from Alderman Arnett as well.
Oh, I do see it. So can we deal with the first one first, or is it the order matter?
I suppose we can deal with the first one first.
Okay, so the first one is Savage Amendment, adds an accountability requirement where the Housing Authority in the City of Annapolis must report on how the funds provided by the city are used. And you can see the new language in the, what do you call this, in the draft. Alderman Schneidermeyer, and then I was going to call on Ms. Buckland to see if she could add any information.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My understanding was this was already a requirement through the deal that we were making. I think it might be repetitive, and where I'm coming from this is, one, I think it might be repetitive. Two, I understand wanting to make sure everything is transparent and spent well, but this is a complex deal and I want to try to keep it as straightforward as possible. So if it's already a requirement, I don't personally see a need for this amendment. But Ms. Buckland, am I mistaken?
I think this is addressing in some sense two different things. As part of just any agreement, the city obviously wants to have some assurances that and insight into how funds get spent. My read of this particular amendment is that the council has a particular interest in this topic and the outcome of it, and therefore is essentially formally requesting a report every 6 months of how is it going. I don't really see those things as being in conflict with each other. I think it does certainly incentivize us on the city to make sure that those reports are very thorough and vetted so that that can get sent to you, but I don't really see them as being in conflict. I interpret this more as an expression of deep interest on the part of council.
Thank you for the clarification.
I was just looking through the actual language in the legislation, and it doesn't speak to a level of specificity, I guess, the 6-month review. So is there anything, I don't want to say onerous, but negative about that 6-month timeline? And I'm talking about what that's in the amendment. Is that an appropriate?
That doesn't strike me as onerous.
Okay. Alderman Arnett?
Yes, Madam Chair, I support this amendment. I am loath to add more burden to an already under stress housing authority. But on the other hand, we used to get quarterly reports from the housing authority in person, and we're not getting those anymore. And this is not a trivial amount of money. I think they're also getting $1 million from the county to do the same thing. And I think getting the reporting is important, so we know what's happening to the money, but also they know we care about what's happening to the money.
Okay, so is that a,
Motion to recommend favorable, the amendment number 1.
I'll second for the sake of bringing it forward.
okay, further discussion? Alderman Chandler?
I have some mixed feelings on it. I do understand though wanting the transparency, so I think I'm going to reluctantly vote yes on this. I may noodle this over for the final vote, but I do understand where we're coming from, and I think we're all on the same side in general for wanting to help HACA and wanting to make sure this is done transparently. So,
May I ask what your reluctance is? Is it having to report, or is it timeliness, or?
burdens, it's potential burdens. The deal, I was always under the impression again that the deal kind of required this. And then does it come across as condescending is another potential feeling I have. But
We're gonna give it to
500,000.
you, but we want you to tell us how you're going to spend it.
Yeah, but $500,000 is also something we can't just let go on vibes. So I understand. It's something that I have some concerns on, but here in this committee room, I think it is a good idea. I may noodle it over a little more, but.
Okay, that's fair.
If I may, Alderman Chandler, I have some of those same anxieties, but it is overcome by the fact that this is a lot of money, but also I think by following up with them, they know we're paying attention and that we see this as a significant amount of money and that we care about it getting implemented. So I do understand your feelings of angst and share them to some degree, but I still support the amendment.
Fair.
Okay. Well, I'm in agreement also. My first thought was, wow, no strings attached, just, no, that wasn't very comfortable. So I don't have a problem. I asked the question about the timeliness, if 6 months was an adequate amount of time to get an update, because as the Alderman said, we used to get quarterly updates. But I will gladly support it. I know it's needed. We just have to make sure we can keep up with it. So, hearing no further discussion, all in favor of Amendment 1, the Savage Amendment on R44, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, and then the second amendment is the Arnett Amendment that stresses the city's payment to the Housing Authority as a one-time emergency payment. Alderman, would you like to speak to it?
Yes, I would be happy to. I'm a regular attendee at the HACA board meetings, and I've also attended meetings with the executive director. And I have heard a strong sense that from both the director and the board, that the city should be a regular partner in helping to pay for the capital improvements for the housing authority. And while I fully understand and recognize there's a severe need for capital improvements, I do not think that we have done the groundwork to become a permanent financial partner with the housing authority, and that's why I wanted to emphasize this is a one-time and by inference unusual contribution of a significant amount of money, recognizing the dire straits they're in and the arrears that they're in. And we do want to help out, but we don't want to be committed to being a permanent partner, financial partner.
Okay, Alderman Jannemeyer, any?
I think it makes sense, and honestly, my understanding of public housing is that it's moving away from true government-owned into the P3 model and more into mixed use anyway, because the genuine experiment of shoving low-income housing into a corner and making it government-owned kind of failed. And see, this is
Diplomatically expressed.
yeah.
All right. I too am in support. Alderman, you and I had this discussion before you submitted it, and I totally agree. I'm under the belief that our exec came from a setting not unlike Baltimore, where they actually have a housing department that's part of the city government and city budget. And we are not set up that way for any number of reasons. And so we help when we can, but it's not a permanent fix. So this addresses that, I believe. So further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of a favorable recommendation for R4424 Amendment 2?
Aye.
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 Aye. Okay, then we come to R44 as amended. I entertain a motion.
So moved.
Second?
Second. All right, further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right.
Was there an AP 53?
It was withdrawn. He wasn't here.
Okay, thank you.
You added it to your agenda.
I did add it to it?
We did add it to the agenda, but he did not show up.
Right.
So point of procedure question, I guess, do we have to postpone action?
I think so.
Madam Chair, I would like to make a motion to postpone action on AP 5324.
Can I have a second? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Can I have a hint as to what it is? Because I don't have
It's,
it. So.
it's an appointment of Mr. Everett Bellamy to the Planning Commission.
Oh, I look forward to seeing the background on that.
Yes. So it'll be in Granicus after this meeting.
Can
Okay,
I make a gratuitous comment at this point?
Could we make a?
We have had a flood of appointments and reappointments, And I think we ought to give Hillary Raftovich an attaboy because we're really addressing what had been a serious deficiency in members. We still need work on the Board of Appeals and the Building Board of Appeals, but we are getting caught up. And a lot of that is through Hillary's efforts. So I just would like to express I appreciate that.
Thank you, and you're right, there were a lot more coming, but today we only had 3. And this one, as I said, will be postponed. That's the motion that's on the floor now. Okay, so AP 10 and AP 53 will come back to us. So all in favor of postponing AP 53, please say aye. 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 And yes, the kudos to Hillary for bringing these to us. Okay, we are not finished. We still have 2 reports. The Office of Community Service update. Ms. Buckland, since I see no one from the staff here, so are you reporting out for them?
They had a pre-scheduled training today, so they were scheduled to be out today. So I can certainly give you an update based on the best of my knowledge. The office does stay pretty busy. For the month of September, for example, they participated in 9 different outreach events across the city. They do end up spending a lot of time trying to work directly within the community and to be available to help walk people through what are sometimes confusing social services programs and what kinds of benefits might be available to them. That has also included, obviously, because the Hispanic liaison position has not yet been filled, some of those activities continue to fall under the Office of Community Services. So the Latino art reception, for example, that happened as part of Hispanic Heritage Month was organized by them and stuff like that. They have had, for rental assistance, I believe they have processed they've had 124 applications, 72 of which ended up have had approvals and checks cut. Those applications are open 3 days a week. It's Monday, Wednesday, Friday, so they try to get them into particular blocks of time. Some of that was based on the schedule of Jada, who had been here previously. For the Child and Family Success grants, that grant, the application period had been open. They ended up with only 3 applicants that they went ahead and that was communicated during the Housing and Human Welfare last committee session. They did end up extending that period, and they reached out to all current FY24 organizations that had those grants to make sure they knew that that was reopened and stuff. As of the last update I had, they didn't actually have any additional applicants. So we will end up with a discussion about how to move forward with those. But they have been reaching out to different organizations. We also ended up having some meetings this last week with grantees about, I know that invoicing processes has come up. So the grant programs, the contracts are structured a little bit differently. The Adopt a Community grants, the Child and Family Success grants, the contract itself specifies that it's an upfront 75% payment and then 25% later on in the year. The community grants, The way that that contract is written is that it says it will follow the payment that was requested in the proposal, the schedule, but there's often not an actual schedule in there. So if I look at one of those contracts, there's not actually a schedule to follow. The rest of that language is cost reimbursement. But I think a lot of grantees had misread or just misunderstood the relationship between the reporting timeline, which is quarterly, and the invoicing timeline. The contract actually doesn't, in the absence of having an actual schedule, doesn't actually have a timeline. So when we met with grantees this last Friday, we did clarify for them that they have the option of invoicing kind of when it is meaningful for them. For some organizations, that might be quarterly. They want to do it with the reporting. For some of them, it might be monthly, or for someone who has a large expense that's very clumped together, they might want to do it right after that purchase. The contract actually allows all of those things to happen. And we also clarified that because it does say actual expenses, there does need to be some evidence of actual expenses, but that can look a variety of ways. We have a couple of different organizations, for example, that have multiple funding sources, and so a given purchase might get allocated amongst several different funding streams. It's fine with me if they send in a report out of QuickBooks or whatever they're using to keep track of their expenses that just says, here's what I spent, right? I'm fine with that. Clarified for them that, if we had someone who wanted to do an audit, those invoices are auditable. We might end up asking for more information, but that we were open to what that evidence looks like. So those meetings, I think, went very well. The feedback we had from them was positive. I know, Alderwoman Finlayson, you've had some folks speaking with you, and I hope you will share with us anything that you hear, because sometimes those organizations will only say the positive things to us. And so I do want to make sure we get a well-rounded view of how folks are feeling after those meetings. There are a number of things that are going on, I think, in people's lives. One of the things I appreciate is that the social services world is, it hits people where they live, right? It engenders a lot of passion in folks. And so I think all of us end up feeling like feeling like there are a lot of things we could be doing. And so I had asked Aisha to take a look at what, given the programming that we have, the priorities that are on the table, what are some of those range of possibilities of ways that we might be able to go about addressing those. Obviously, the city, for example, has made an investment in rental assistance, and council and others have expressed that it would be nice if we had more funds to devote to that purpose. But that's not necessarily the only way to help people who are experiencing financial difficulties. City of Gaithersburg actually has a program. They call it a financial empowerment center. But OCS has been doing some exploration there and in other kinds of ways to see, what kind of options are available where we might be able to take this idea and make the most out of it. Like, what kind of options do we have? So OCS has been looking forward to, met with Housing and Human Welfare at their last meeting. I would like for us to come back to have a fuller discussion. We didn't end up having as full a discussion at that committee meeting as I personally would have liked. But I think it bears having a fuller discussion about, what does that potential lay of the land look like, and where are people's preferences, and what parts of that make sense, and what do we want to pursue? Aisha obviously brings a range of experiences to the table, and I think it's worth hearing, based on her experience and the exploration that they've done, what kind of things are possible. So I look forward to having that. I look forward to that discussion. Were there particular questions? I just rambled.
I would like to, first of all, I had requested that there be a report, because now in our notes, none of what you said is recorded in our notes. I would like to have something.
Absolutely.
With just a bulleted item.
Yep.
And I'm asking all of my committees that I'm involved in to do the same thing, because we all share information, but it gets lost because it's not recorded in our actual notes.
Yep, we can absolutely
and
send
minutes. But I asked that this be put on the agenda because I have a growing concern that was generated originally with the community grants, and as you're aware, because I've brought this to your attention. Yeah. This is October, and our community grant recipients haven't received a dime yet. And, well, if they did, it's been the last week. Because
some of them, we had one who actually spent out completely in July and has been fully paid, for example. So there's
one
variation.
out of 45 or 50. But my point is, we knew on the 8th or 9th of June what organizations we were going to be funding. Now, granted, no monies could leave the doors until July 1, but we knew then what we were dealing with. And it's the end of September when I started getting calls saying, what is going on? I went to the city attorney to ask what we were doing, because I was being told they want receipts before we get any funding. And the attorney went through both the Adopt a Community grants and the regular grants and said there is no requirement that receipts be submitted prior to payment, which really is a hardship on organizations who we're trying to help by giving them a little money. And then we say, but yeah, you got to put up your own money before we give you your grant. That has not been our process, and that is not what according to what the attorney said. And he went through the application, or whatever it's called, and sent me copies of the two different types, and it doesn't speak to that. So I guess my concern is we're putting, and I'm not saying that we don't get documentation for their expenditures, but to make them put out their money in advance before we give them ours, I think is an unfair hardship to the people we're thanking for doing extra work that we can't do. So
the community grants, those contracts, we haven't changed those contracts or how they've functioned in the time that I've been with the city. So when I arrived, year and a half, so FY23 contracts, that was how they had been, how they were being handled, and in FY24. So I hear you. I just want you to know that's not a change we made for this year.
Well, and I wasn't suggesting that, well, it was new to me, but the point is that the city attorney said that's not a requirement that we have. And so I would hope that we wouldn't go forward in something that's not in the agreements that we have them sign.
It is explicitly not a requirement for the Adopt a Community grants and the Child and Family Success grants.
I don't know about the second one you're referring to at all.
Yeah.
But anyway, part of my concern, again, is, we created this department. I was the genesis behind it along with Alderman Arnett. And by now, I had hoped that we would have 4 or 5 social workers in that department. We have 1 social worker. And that is hardly the image that we initiated when we created this department. And it is our fault. And we're to blame because I've given Adopt a Community, you all have community grants, you have the other program, you have housing, the affordability, everything is being dumped into this department and we don't have the manpower for it. And what grieves me even more is using monies that are set aside for social worker for other staff positions. And granted, it's support staff that you need, but we need social workers. You know, I had a community meeting last week and the woman railed against me for over an hour because shots went through her house and she had no one to call. And I couldn't say, well, our social workers are ready because I know they're off doing other things because we only have 1 again. So we really need to get back to, and maybe we need to start by saying what it is as the objective of the department. Because are we meeting the needs, you know, going to festivals and events and that's all well and good. But on the ground, meeting the needs of the people is what's crucial to me. And I think to some of my colleagues. So that's my real angst about that. And that's why I put it on our agenda, because I want it out there. I want it to be known. And I'm going to raise it until we get this right.
We have 1 social worker, but there are other staff within Office of Community Services that do one-on-one work with residents. Obviously had a tragedy within the city during this last month, and there were OCS staff who worked directly with that family. So the social work position is not the only one that does one-on-one service. She obviously has a set of qualifications to offer a wider range of things. So she's going to get the most complex cases, right, and stuff like that. But she's not the only person who does one-on-one work.
Are they trained? I mean, who are they? And I'm not asking for specifics, but it concerns me that we have people doing these kinds of jobs, and are they trained to do this kind of work? How effective are they? Who's evaluating the work that's being done?
Yeah, all of those are good questions. The Office of Community Services, I think, has had a longstanding interest in and commitment to ongoing training. That actually was what they had signed up for today, for example, which is mental health first aid, which is let's make sure everyone has a foundational set of skills so that it doesn't matter who you talk to, anyone in the office, right? So they do have a commitment to some of that. What I think I'm hearing is an interest in having is an interest in that fuller, deeper discussion so that you feel like you've got a really solid understanding of what's there, what's available.
Well, I would flip that around a bit, because I would like for the department to have an understanding of what our vision is for that department. Okay? We set it up with an express purpose in mind. So they need to know what our expectations are. And I'm not sure that that's clear. And I'm glad that they're being trained today, and I'm not saying that they shouldn't be. But I did send the head of the department a note saying, send me a note, some notes about what you're doing so that I could share them today. But
I will take that on. I actually had asked her to wait until, because I will own that I misunderstood the timing. I wanted to be able to make sure that what she sent you answered all of your questions, knowing that knowing that she had signed up for that training today, I wanted to make sure that I could faithfully assist.
Okay, well, and I appreciate you looking forward in that direction, so. Anyway, Alderman Arnett, I'm sorry, I didn't look over my shoulder.
So, Madam Chair, I want to amplify your points and maybe add a little. Years ago, you and I wanted to start the Office of Community Caring, which is a name I still prefer, but I'll accept what the
Me
group is
too.
called for
Me too.
now. But the point is community caring. And in my mind's eye, I won't speak for you, I had the notion that we needed at least 6 social workers to cover the needs of the city. And it is really a broad array of things that the assistant city manager has pointed out this group does. And I don't think they have neither the staff or the dollars to really fulfill the mission that we had in mind for them. And so I would really like to keep this on our agenda for a next Rules Committee meeting, because I want to hear from the staff, but I agree with your point. We need to reaffirm with them our vision of the expectations for this work. So that's the big picture comment I would make. The more specific comments I would make are 2. 1, I've been waiting for a review and improvements to the grants process. And part of that is we now have at least 3 different significant pools of money that are under different auspices. Your community grants project, this, things that Alderwoman Pendle Charles are doing, and things that Alderman Gay are doing. And I would suggest that we may need to think about focusing and probably enlarging the collective size of those pools to face the work that we're doing. But I would like to see the community grants process strengthened, and I would like to hear more regular reports. What Ms. Buckland gave us was reaffirming to hear some of the different things the groups are doing, but we sort of get it in snippets. And to me, this is a very important function that we really ought to be brought to our attention on a regular basis through a report that we can read and review and be ready to comment on when we meet with the group ahead of time rather than getting it on the fly. And that's not a pejorative comment on getting the update from Ms. Buckland. It's that we take this seriously and we'd really like to spend more time looking at it. So I think we need to sort of light a fire and maybe throw some more dollars under this effort and get it fleshed out to its full prominence and its full ability to help our constituents.
Okay, Alderman Schnellmeyer, any comments you'd like to add?
I concur with your statements.
Thank you. Well, the other item on our agenda, Ms. Buckland, this is you too, is the city office space analysis. I understand, well, we all heard, I think, that finance in part has moved across the street. We haven't gotten any information about the study that was done, and I'm not sure this is the right place. I think the full council should be made aware, but will you share with us? And
yeah, I've tried to include at least for your general awareness, some of the moves around like 25 Shaw in that monthly update. My understanding is that the goal, the due diligence part of just having looked at all the building stuff, systems stuff, is wrapping up. My understanding is that the goal is to actually get council, all of council, to be able to see that space later this month, so that you have a sense of what it is and an appreciation of that. Part of the decision-making for that space does come then from that space study of, what are the needs of these various departments, where are the space deficiencies, how does that how do movements, if council ends up agreeing with that move, how does that address the space needs that were identified? Now, I thought that study had been shared with you guys. And in fact,
It has.
okay.
I haven't seen it. Was it attached to
It
your
was sent out
report?
several months ago as an attachment. I printed it out, skimmed it, but I haven't digested it fully. And I think it's something that we might also want to put on a future rules agenda.
Could you send it independently? What was it attached to? Do you recall? Well,
It was in an email I received from Ms. Buckland.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm the one that got it.
No, I think I sent it to all council. But but it had come to my attention that you guys didn't have it. And so I thought I had sent it to everyone, but I'm delighted to send it to you.
that would be great. So that will help us understand the need for the space that you're going to describe to us
Yep.
on Shaw Street.
Yes. Maybe.
I mean, we know we need space. I would just appreciate knowing what the study said and where the space is needed.
Yeah, I can send that to you. There are deficiencies, obviously, within Department of Finance, HR, but others as well. Those are sort of finance is the biggest one, but they're not the only one. And so that space study does speak to those various deficiencies. But I absolutely can send that to you. And that is then something that, as we look at finalizing those plans, or finalizing the intentions around 25 Shaw, that does need to be framed in terms of what does that do in terms of space needs. You are correct about that.
Did the study also analyze the spaces that we have that we're renting? I know in the past, when we were renegotiating Gorman Street, we looked at the benefits to continuing to rent that space or doing something different. We built that big, wonderful new public works facility that does not house all of the public works staff. What could be done differently as far as configuring spaces and that kind of thing?
It does. It looked at a variety of spaces. It's not just this building. Gorman is explicitly included in that. And across the street, where IT and procurement are, was also explicitly included in that. Sorry, I'm.
And Chinkapin, we still have space on Chinkapin, right? Public Works? No, yeah, no, but further up, I think, is Public Works, next to the comic shop. Transportation's further down on the other side of the street. So you didn't even know we were out there on Chinkapin. You know where it is?
Yeah, it's by Third Eye.
Yeah. Yeah, public, transportation's further down on the other side. Ross isn't a comic book person, so he wouldn't know where that store is.
I used to frequent the comic shop.
So
The what?
I used to frequent the comic shop.
Oh,
So
I thought you
this-
said the gun
Or
shop.
material for his act.
Sorry, Ms. Buckland, we've gotten punchy now.
I'm sorry.
I haven't eaten
This
since
particular
9:30.
space study, it addressed it only has those three buildings in it, 160 and 161 Duke of Gloucester and 145 Gorman. Those being shared spaces and housing the places where the kind of the current need is most acute. So it was not, at least what I have here, didn't look at all space the city owns across the entire across the entire city. But it is those three, which is obviously
Which
planning
three,
and
I'm
zoning.
sorry, 160,
Yeah, 160 and 161.
right.
And then 145 Gorman. So planning and zoning, HR.
Okay, where's,
DPW.
oh, you're, okay, across the street, I got it.
Yeah, yeah.
So we didn't look at all of our spaces then.
This does not. This predates me. The final study does not, but the initiation of it predates me. So I can't speak to the scope.
Okay.
But I will absolutely, in fact, let me do that right now.
Well, maybe this will be on, you said you would like to present to the full council, and I think it would be a worthwhile work session to have, probably.
Yeah, and I think the desire is to actually, for you guys to be able to actually truly see the space.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, that would be fine too, but I think we want to see the big picture. I think I'm interested in seeing the big picture anyway. So, all right, I skipped right over from the last subject. I will make sure that the Office of Community Services, Community Caring, is on our agenda, Caitlin, for an update. Any other questions for Ms. Buckland about spacing needs or decisions? Okay. Well, I'm sad to say that ends our agenda. Not really, not that at all.
I would like to compliment the committee. I thought we had a very productive meeting today. Not that we don't always, but long. And I will tell you, I have a bottle of Irish whiskey sitting in front of me, torturing me as we progress during the day. And I would like to repair to it. So I offer a motion to adjourn.
Thanks, Ross. Thanks.
You tease. Second.
Too much information. Well, and I want to say thank you. How was it? See, it wasn't bad. You did well doing participating virtually.
Yes, he
That
did.
was fine, yeah.
But I
Yeah.
was right there. He sure did.
He did. And you didn't have to run up there
Yes,
and
it-
fix anything
No, I
for him,
didn't.
ready?
So we have to thank the COT-TV staff, Mark and Julian, Madeline, for making this available to us.
I was going to say it took all 5 of them to get you on there, right?
No, actually, it was pretty expeditious.
Yeah, they're
Madeline
good.
says she does appreciate it.
Madeline, thank you. All right, gentlemen, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second?
All in favor, please say aye. Thank you,
Aye.
Ms. Buckland. Sorry, I didn't mean to